Welcome to Classic Trials. If you're new here, my name is Alita. I'm a lawyer licensed in California and DC, and on this channel, we make sense of the law one bite at a time. In this series, we observe and analyze the play-by-play of some of the biggest trials that have shaped the public consciousness of the American judicial system. In this season, we're working our way through the case of California v. Erik and Lyle Menendez. Growing up in Princeton, New Jersey, and then Beverly Hills, California, these young men had everything they could ever want, or so it seemed, until one night on August 20th, 1989, they approached Jose and Kitty Menendez with newly purchased shotguns. Put on trial for murdering their own parents, they claimed self-defense, arguing they were terrorized in their own home by abusive parents until they could take no more. Which argument is more convincing? Come join and see for yourself. All right. Hello. Happy Monday, you guys. It's another Menendez Monday. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you're coming in from. I hope you are having a good one. So yeah, it's been a minute since we had a proper Menendez Monday, right? It's been a few weeks. I apologize for that. Part of that, of course, is because of the Hannah Gutierrez Reed trial. But before that, I was traveling a bit, and so it's been a minute. We are revisiting the testimony of Dr. Ann Burgess. So if you remember, she is not only an expert witness in this case, but she's also legendary for having started the basically like helping to start the serial killer program for the FBI. And she was the basis for a feature character in Criminal Minds. We're going to get to part 4 of her testimony. We're not going to get through all of part 4, which is there's 4 parts on Court TV's website, but we're going to get through the remainder of her cross-examination. Redirect will be in our next episode. And then we're going to get on to some more witnesses. I did skip over one section on Court TV's website. It was going to be Dr. John Conte, but it was all a hearing to get into what kind of things that he might testify to. So I figured since the jury's not there, most of it was arguing back and forth. The sound wasn't that great. I decided to just skip on over it and get to the portions where we are actually, seeing what the jury sees. So, Debbie, thank you so much. Behavioral Science Unit, now called Behavioral Analysis Unit. Perfect. Thank you for that. Okay. So, this is episode 58. Like I said, Dr. Ann Burgess, part 4. Let's get into it, shall we? As always, we will be, ask whatever questions you want to ask in the chat. I'll save them, maybe pause to answer some things. And otherwise, we're gonna continue with this cross-examination. From what I remember from part 3 and the cross-examination there, I don't remember it really sticking all that much from like what the state was trying to get to. She's just such a professional and so knowledgeable about what she does and what she's been doing for such a long time at this point. That it seemed like nothing was really sticking. So, okay, let's just get into it. And if we have any other comments, we'll bring him up then.
Okay, let's make it 5 minutes and then we'll proceed.
Okay, one other thing that I noticed, sorry, I didn't even pull it up. One thing that I noticed when I was going through this earlier to kind of hit through commercials and things, is that the sound on this one is a bit quieter. So I'm going to turn my mic down. I might need you guys to turn your own mics up. I apologize. I can't boost the sound because it's not on YouTube. It's on. So let me see here. I'm going to turn it down, turning it down. Okay. So it's not on YouTube, so I can't boost the sound. My sound booster works on YouTube, but it doesn't work on Court TV's website. So okay. So I apologize for that in advance. Let me know if you're having serious issues with hearing, and I'll like turn my mic down even more or something just to kind of try to balance things out. All right.
Yes. Are you familiar with the information contained in this report which is an incident of Trey Heinberg? Yes.
Object to the form of the question, Your Honor.
Rephrase the
interview.
question. Rephrase the question, please.
Are you familiar with the report which describes an incident with Craig Heinberg?
Same objection.
All right, an interview with Mr. Heinberg, is that it?
Yes. Are you familiar with a police report which describes an interview with Mr. Heinberg, which describes an incident?
Objection, Your Honor.
Overruled.
Yes, I am.
Did you take the information in that police report into account in evaluating Erik Menendez?
Yes, I did.
And did you discard the information contained in that report?
I didn't discard it. I took it into consideration, the total picture.
Did you take into consideration the theft, the grand theft, and the burglaries in Calabasas?
Yes, I did.
And did you have any opinion as to how the grand theft and the burglaries in Calabasas affected Erik Menendez's mental state?
Object to the form of the question, Your Honor. Only one burglary and one grand theft.
All right, with that modification, you may answer the question.
Yes, I did take it into consideration. And
And what did you find?
what did I find? I found that there was certainly a serious problem in this family.
Did you think there was a problem with Mr. Erik Menendez as a result of your review of the information?
I felt it was a problem for the whole family, not just Erik Menendez.
But he was part of the family that you found a problem with, is that correct?
That is correct.
And did you find that there was any kind of sphere response which went into his commission of the grand theft and the burglary in Calabasas?
No, I did not evaluate it in that context.
And did you think that he was reacting to his neurobiological changes when he went into the two homes and took property belonging to others?
Object to the form of the question. It misstates the facts regarding the grand theft.
Overruled.
It was taken, that was taken in context with also with outcome, et cetera, in terms of a family issue in which it had significance for the family regarding the any of the fear response. No, I did not see that present.
All right. And did you notice the type of property which was taken in the second incident, that is the burglary of the Ginsburg home?
I was aware of that, yes.
And you were aware that it was a great deal of property, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. How would you classify that particular crime? Would it be disorganized or organized?
Your Honor, I'm going to object.
And the legal basis of the
It's
objection?
an improper opinion with respect to a burglary type of thing.
Overruled.
I don't have that type of information. What I do know is that material was returned, that it certainly was symptomatic of other issues, and that's how I evaluated those two particular events.
So, of course, what she's getting into, what Pam Bozanich on from the state is getting into on cross-examination here is getting into the burglaries and other stuff that Erik had gotten into with the friends in Calabasas before they moved from Calabasas to Beverly Hills. The state, of course, wants to jump all over all of this because it's it looks bad for him. It looks bad that he's got a little bit of a criminal record prior to this trial, of which of course is a massive criminal record to have now. But these burglaries and grand thefts that he had gotten himself into in high school, the state has every reason to want to talk about this as much as possible and to bring this up to this expert to force her to talk about it. Now she is definitely saying that, like, yeah, I knew about this and I considered it, and it's a family issue more than anything, which I wish she would explain a little bit more why it's a family issue. Maybe that'll come on redirect. But oh, what else was I going to say? But the last question about, like, is this would this indicate a disorganized crime or an organized crime? If you'll remember that at the part 1 of Dr. Burgess's testimony, she laid out a framework for things that you can tell about a particular murder scene, to see if that was planned out ahead of time, if it wasn't planned out ahead of time. And you can see where a lot of this comes in contact with her experience with working with the FBI with serial killers, right? Because she has a lot of experience of figuring out just how much someone planned out a particular crime. With serial killers, you're talking about that all the time, that they've mapped out every single little detail in advance, right? Um, well, maybe not every single little detail, but very often that's the case, right? So here, what she had testified previously in her direct examination was that here everything was disorganized. There's nothing to indicate that they had any sort of premeditation for any of this. That this was, there was a little bit of cleanup afterwards because they had picked up the shells, but other than that, there's nothing about it that suggests that they had planned out any of this. Like it was in a close residential neighborhood. They used very, very, like, the loudest weapons basically that you can possibly choose from, right? They used shotguns. I mean, the only thing louder than that would be like artillery fire, right? There are many other weapons that they could have chosen that would have been a lot quieter to aid detection. It's a densely populated area. Beverly Hills is very expensive, but it's not exactly like these homes have a ton of acreage around them. Like, this is Southern California, where very expensive homes can be sandwiched next to other very expensive homes. So there were a lot of indicators here that she suggested early on to say that this was all a disorganized crime scene. So this last question is really just kind of getting into either Pam doesn't understand how this framework works, that it's for murder scenes, and for other like more serious kind of crime scenes, but that you have to have details about these other instances of crimes, right? These burglaries, these grand thefts and whatnot, that she just doesn't have those details about them. So she couldn't even check, to make some kind of a determination. So, but just like looking at her look of incredulity here is just like, it's fairly telling. So either Pam doesn't understand, or she's just really trying to, like, I don't know, get a dig in her, like, as to say, like, your framework is all quackery. It doesn't make any sense. It's not scientific. But anyway, I don't know. Let's continue on. Oh, and also, sorry about this. Flashfan85, thanks for the member chat, and thanks for being a member for 7 months. Hey, Fave Law Tuber, how are you? Thanks for being the best Law Tuber around. Love and support you. Thank you so much. I'm doing well. It's a Monday. I'm trying to get a lot done today. Trying to get a recap out for the James Crumbly trial. I might end up having to consolidate it with day 3. Days 1 and 2 are already consolidated, but might have to add day 3 as well, and then get them out tomorrow, as soon as possible. So we'll see. Otherwise, I might get them out today. I don't know. Maybe more like, it's looking more like tomorrow. Artur Risnin, member for 13 months. Thanks so much for being a member for 13 whole months. 13, your lucky number. Roses for the ladies and the dudes too, if you want one. I have extra. Wonderful. Love to see it. Okay, folks, let's continue on.
Did you consider them to be criminal?
Well, they were handled, as I understand it, in a juvenile manner, so that they were handled through a legal system, and that he was given probation, and he was required, or he did, I guess it was not necessarily required, but he did seek counseling for that. And it was within a family context.
All right, but did you regard that behavior as criminal?
Objection for your question on the first topic.
Overall.
Well, the behavior was dealt with in a legal way, so that it certainly did impart that whether I would consider it that, I certainly consider it symptomatic of a larger issue.
Now, did you consider the Calabasas theft and burglary in your evaluation of Erik Menendez's state of mind on the night of August the 20th of 1989?
It was certainly a factor when I looked at all of the information that was available to me in evaluating what happened on August 20th.
Now, if the information given to you by Erik Menendez was untrue, does that change your opinion as to his state of mind?
Objection, Your Honor, given the court's previous ruling.
Overall.
Could you repeat that, please? The question.
If the information given to you by Erik Menendez was untrue, does that change your opinion as to his state of mind on the night that he killed his parents?
Well, I did not determine it as untrue. I would have to be given considerable evidence to say, for me to base that it was untrue.
Well, did you review Erik Menendez's testimony in front of the juries about his purchase of the handguns?
Yes, I didn't, it was not a handgun.
Sustain. Rephrase the question.
His attempt to purchase handguns at a Big Five in Santa Monica. Did you review that testimony?
Yes, I did review that.
And what was your opinion of whether or not he was telling the truth in that testimony?
I'm going to object to that, Your Honor. See, the people objected when I asked.
Wait, counsel, let's not argue the matter.
Okay, I would object. Possibly.
Objection sustained.
In evaluating Erik Menendez's truth-telling ability to you, did you consider what he said on the witness stand to this jury and the other jury about attempting to purchase handguns on the afternoon of the 18th of August of 1989?
Yes, I considered that.
And did you reject that as indicating that he was lying to you about anything?
No, I did not.
Did you consider that he might have been lying to you?
No, I did not consider. Why would he admit to something like that if he were, if it was not true? That
You
he
un-
went out to look for, that he and his brother went to purchase handguns. He did not have to say that.
Well, you are aware of the fact that the prosecution is in possession of gunshot purchase records from San Diego from later in the evening of the 18th of August of 1989, correct?
Yes, I am.
And you understand that that particular evidence could be interpreted as showing planning on the part of the defendants.
Oh, I don't see that as planning. If he was really going to plan something, why not wait the 2 weeks when he would have a weapon that was the more logical weapon to have if he was planning something?
Well, you are aware of the fact that either before or after the killings, the defendants came up with an alibi, correct?
They had a series of statements, yes.
And you are aware of the fact that in order for an alibi to work, a time needs to be established for a criminal activity.
Yes.
All right. So in other words, if I have an alibi, but no one can determine when the crime occurred, the alibi is pretty worthless.
Yes, but by the same token, an alibi is supposed to work, and this certainly did not work. I mean, they could have backed up everything so it would work. I mean, I think that's the point, that that alibi did not work, if you want to consider it as an alibi.
So are you saying because the alibi didn't work, it wasn't planned?
What I'm saying is that was a social plan that was in place, and it didn't work because of what happened immediately before that social plan was to be put into place, which was going to a movie and doing the rest of the activities that they had planned for that Sunday evening.
You believed Erik Menendez when he talked to you, is that correct?
Yes.
Now, in order for an alibi to work, someone has to know what time the crime occurred, aside from the killer, correct?
Your Honor, I think at this point we're calling for speculation.
It goes to the witness's state of mind as far as her explanations of these things. You understand the question?
Yes.
And one way to notify people that a crime has occurred is to make noise, correct?
Yes.
And in fact, in this case, the neighbors were able to pin the time of the crime in a period of about 10 minutes.
That is correct.
Okay, one witness said it was at 10:10, one said approximately 10 o'clock.
Okay. Yes. I
Um,
read that.
So that in order for someone to have an alibi which is effective, somebody would have to know that the crime occurred at a particular time, let's say 10 o'clock or 10:10 on the night of August the 20th, correct?
All right. Yes.
And noise would be one way to accomplish that, correct?
Yes. Noise. Yes.
Now, you indicated the alibi was not successful, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, and what does that mean to you, that it wasn't successful?
Well, what that means to me is that it wasn't planned, that a plan means something is going to be carried off successfully.
Dr. Burgess, you are familiar with criminal activity because of your research with the FBI.
Yes, I am.
Plenty of criminals get caught who've planned, wouldn't you
Your Honor,
agree?
I'm going to object to this now as argumentative.
Overruled.
I'm sorry.
Plenty of criminals get caught who've planned their crimes, correct?
I don't know how many get caught who plan their crime.
Are you aware of an incident in, I think it was the early 80s, when President Carter sent the military into Iran to rescue captives in Iran? Are you familiar?
I'm going to object to this as improper.
Sustain.
Yeah, what does that have to
Dr.
do with
Burgess, is
literally
that-
anything, Pam? We're getting into the Iran Contra or no the hostage situation. Whatever. Either way, like like global geopolitics, like what's happening here? What's happening here, Pam? Where are we going with this? I'm so glad the judge sustained that objection. Just look at her face. She's like, "Yeah, what WTF? What are you doing?"
The fact that a plan doesn't work doesn't mean it wasn't planned.
Your Honor, I can object to this also. This has all been asked and answered by previous round of cross-examination.
To some extent it has, but I'll give the prosecution limited leeway in this area. Overruled.
I basically believe that a plan is supposed to work. That in this case, where there is the explanation is that it's a social plan that's already in place. What happens is an intervening aspect of this, and so the plan does not work. If the plan was to work, everything would have been backed up, so it would have worked. There was what contraindication for the shootings to have occurred earlier in the evening, so that then the plan, if it was a plan, would be to go to the movies and go and meet these other people, et cetera, et cetera.
If the information that Erik Menendez gave to you about having been sexually molested was untrue, would that change your opinion as to whether or not he'd been sexually molested?
Well, that's one of the factors I look at, is to weigh the information that I have. That's precisely what one does when one renders an opinion.
Now, are you familiar with an instrument called a colposcope?
Yes, I am.
Okay. And what is a colposcope?
Colposcope is a magnifying instrument that takes pictures of certain areas of the body, and those pictures or photographs can then be examined by other persons.
Okay, and colposcopes are often used in child molest investigations to search for physical indicia of molestation. Is that
Your Honor,
correct?
I'm going to object to counsel testifying. This is beyond the scope of this witness's testimony and her expertise.
Objection overruled.
That is correct.
Now, in cases of sodomy, are there instances in which sodomy will leave anal scarring?
There may be instances where that occurs, yes.
It is rare, is it not?
That is my understanding of the literature,
Okay.
yes.
Now, you are a nurse, is that correct?
That is correct.
Are you entitled to do physical examinations because you're a nurse?
I do not have a nurse practitioner advanced practice certification for sexual assault exams.
But you have on prior occasions examined children to see if they've been sexually assaulted, is that correct?
I'm going to object to the question of vague as to what you mean by examination.
Sustain. Referring to physical examinations?
No. You have on prior occasions conducted psychological evaluations of children to see if they've been sexually abused, correct?
Yes, I have.
Are you ever provided with information from medical doctors as to whether or not there are any physical findings to corroborate the child's claim of abuse?
Yes, I am.
Is that one thing you ask for in evaluating the truthfulness of a child's claim of child abuse?
Well, it's one piece of information that generally is available in the records if the child has been seen within a fairly recent time of the abuse.
Now, would it be fair to say that not all child abuse leaves physical findings?
Yes, that's true.
Oral copulation, for example, unless you get to the child right away, will not leave any physical findings, correct?
Well, unless also there's been injury to the throat, that
Correct.
would also provide a little bit of latitude in terms of time.
Did you ask for any examination to be done of Erik Menendez to corroborate his claim to you of sexual abuse?
My understanding is that there was going to be material specific to that.
Okay.
That was not something I was to do.
All right. Did you ever ask for that information before you concluded your examination of him psychologically?
Yes.
Were you provided with that information?
No, I do not have the report.
But you went ahead and made your conclusion without having the report, correct?
Yes, I did.
All right. So you have no present knowledge sitting here today as to whether or not there are any physical findings to corroborate what you have found psychologically. Is that correct?
Essentially, yes.
Okay. But you were informed that such an exam was going to be done. Is that correct?
Yes.
And as you sit here today in October of 1993, have you ever inquired as to the results of that physical exam?
Yes.
All right. And were you told the results of that exam?
It was a discussion about what we've just been discussing about how difficult it is to corroborate or to even find certain findings in a person a length of time after the abuse.
Okay, my question is, were you given any information about any results of physical exams done to Erik Menendez to corroborate his child abuse?
Your Honor, at this point, I'm going to object as a cause for hearsay.
Objection overruled. Objection overruled.
I do not have that information.
Did you,
Well, I told you we talked about it, but I don't have any report. That's correct.
did you have an oral report from someone that there were or were not such findings
I
available?
object at this time on grounds of privilege, Your Honor. I'd like to present.
All right, you may do so.
Dr. Burgess,
Really quick here. Flash Fan 85. Thanks so much for the super chat. Wanted to show some support. Thank you so much. Also, I had a trigger warning up on the screen. We'll throw that on and off from time to time. Thanks, Drinko Amy, for that. Debbie Faison Cook, kind of off topic, but isn't there a law that you can't profit from your crimes? Gypsy Rose Blanchard wrote a book and is on a media tour. The Menendez brothers should be out too. Yes, they're usually referred to Son of Sam laws. And so it's for the person who has been convicted. Once they've been convicted, they can't profit from it. I don't know if there is a sunset provision to it or not. So I don't know if she's been able to profit from any of those, book or media tours or anything like that. Because typically what happens is that money goes to either like the victims' families or a particular fund for victims in the state. So I don't know. I mean, well, for her, she is the victim's family, right? Um, so I don't know what the statute says in that jurisdiction. But yeah. So yeah, I don't know exactly what's happening there, but that is you're right about that. That is the case. Just because, thanks so much for the super chat. I'm sorry, but if a plan works, it's a plan, and if a plan does not work, it's not a plan. Seems like bad criteria. I will say there is an aspect here that is a little bit troubling here that I wish she would give a little bit more nuance on, because like to say that, it almost sounds like what she's saying, and she might actually be saying this, that, if somebody has a plan, they don't get caught, which means anyone that's been caught and is charged for murder, let's say, didn't have a plan. That sounds like she's saying they didn't have premeditation. So that means in theory, you could never have someone be charged with premeditated murder, because if you are, it means that they got caught, and that means they didn't have a plan. And then if they didn't have a plan, that means it's not premeditated. It's a little bit of it's kind of a catch-22 that it sort of keeps coming around. So I'm hoping that there's like some level of nuance that she just hasn't delivered yet, that she's going to give at some point, because otherwise that's the one problem with her testimony that I have noticed as well. So thanks for pointing that out and giving me the reminder to talk about that. Mads Bazoom, member for 1 month. 1 month in the Bike Club. Yay. Thank you so much, Mads, for supporting the channel. Really, really appreciate it. Love having you here. All right. Okay, let's continue on.
were you made aware at any time prior to today's date of the results of the physical examination of Erik Menendez?
Not specifically.
Were you generally made aware of the results of the exam?
Yes.
And what general information did you have?
Well, the general information is it's very difficult to determine scarring, anal scarring. So much time had elapsed so that in the general area that supported what I also would have suspected given the literature.
If there had been anal scarring, that would have enhanced your opinion that he had been in fact sexually abused, correct?
Oh, well, yes.
Okay. Now, my question to you is, were you in general given the results of the exam?
This has been answered.
She hasn't answered it. Did you get the results of the exam as far as whether or not any scarring or any other physical evidence was found?
No, I don't have any specific report from the person that has done the exam. I don't have any official direct information.
Since you knew there was a physical exam being done, did you think it was important to try to discover the results of the exam before you rendered your opinion in this courtroom?
Well, as I said, there was a general discussion about that satisfied my question, and I felt I could render an opinion.
So is your answer yes, you found out the results before you rendered your opinion, or no, you did not find out the results before you rendered your opinion?
What I found out supported what both is in the literature and what is my understanding what the testimony may well be. I just don't have anything direct.
Was there a reason you didn't seek out the direct results?
My understanding there was no report available at the time I asked.
Did you ask for an oral report?
No,
Did you ask to speak to the doctor who conducted the exam?
no.
Aside from speaking to Erik Menendez and the doctors whose names you've given to us, who else did you speak to person, either on the phone or in person, about the facts of this case?
I spoke to the family members.
Which family members did you speak to?
I spoke to the two sisters of Jose Menendez, and I spoke to the sister of Mary Louise.
And that was Joan Vandermolen.
That's correct.
Did you speak to Mary Louise Menendez's brothers, Milton and Brian?
No, I did not.
Did you speak to Erik Menendez's paternal grandmother, Maria?
No, I did not.
When you spoke to Marta, when was that?
That was as recent, I think it was about 2 weeks ago.
At the time that you spoke to Marta Cano, were you aware of the testimony that she gave in this courtroom?
Your Honor, I'm going to object and ask to approach before the next question is asked.
Well, since we don't know what that question
Well,
is, I'm not going to.
Ask
First of
them.
all, let me hear an answer to this question.
I read the testimony, yes.
Okay, were you aware of her testimony in regards to a lie she had told for Kitty Menendez to her husband to avoid her getting in trouble? Do you remember her testimony in that regard?
I believe I do.
And do you remember her testimony that it wasn't any big thing and that she would do the same for me?
Yes.
A person she didn't know.
Oh, I don't remember that part.
Okay, would that change your opinion as to the credibility of Marta Cano if you knew that she had made that testimony?
Well, it was in the testimony.
Okay, and you read it
I read it.
and you discarded it.
Well, it's not a matter of discarding or including. I read all the testimony and it's sifted and weighed through the whole procedure. It was a piece of information that was available.
Are you aware of what the Rosenham?
Oh my gosh. She said that she was willing to cover for her sister-in-law and give a white lie to help her out so that she wouldn't have a fight with her husband. And therefore, she's a lying liar who lies. That's like what the state wants the jury to believe, which is just like, I mean, everyone has an inconsistent statement at some point. Everyone has lied to someone at some point in their lives. You too, Pam. So this point right now is just like how she's really trying to hammer hard on Marta's credibility because she willingly said on the stand that she was willing to cover for her sister-in-law is just ridiculous to me. Mads Bazoo, what's the difference between not relevant and lack of foundation objection? I seem to you you meant to say understand the difference at times. So they're getting to two different like reasons for an objection. The objection of not relevant means that the information that they're trying to get, that the person who's asking a question, so the information that Pam is trying to get out of the witness, say, for example, is information that does not make any particular fact that matters in the case more or less likely to be true. So, anything that is kind of getting to any of the elements that are being of any of the charges or any of the defenses. So like the information being provided by the witness isn't relevant if it's not going to make any sort of a difference one way or another to something that is, one of the charges, one of the defenses, or, something about like someone's credibility, for example. So that's basically relevance in a nutshell. And if there's a relevance objection that you're confused about, flag it for me and I'll go back and try to explain it a little bit more concretely that way. That might help. Lack of foundation objection basically is where someone, the attorney asks the witness a question, but they haven't already identified for the jury how this person would know. So they need to, let's say they ask the witness, like, the witness is friends with the defendant. And then they ask them, like, what happened on X day? Objection foundation. First, you have to establish where this person was on that day. Was this person with the defendant on that day? Did the person talk to the defendant on that day? Did the person walk into the room and did they see something? Did they hear something? Like you have to first establish like how this person might know the thing that you're trying to get to. So you've got to like lay a foundation, like kind of like building a building, right? You have to put a foundation first before you put a structure on top of it. It's the same kind of concept, just with the structure of questions to get to like where you're trying to go. I hope that one makes sense. Let me know if not. And then I saw that you had another question. Does speculation objection apply to expert witnesses? So you can have a successful objection on the basis of speculation against an expert witness. It's just more, like more rare, I guess. So first off, with a lay witness, I'll just kind of compare it to a lay witness. With a lay witness, asking them anything about their opinion on anything is going to be speculation, because it has not been established for the jury why they should trust their opinion at all for anything. They are there to testify to what their five senses experienced, right? What they saw, what they heard, what they felt, what they tasted, what they smelled, like all of those things, you know, the relationships that they had with a certain person, but what is their opinion as to this thing that happened? That is going to end up being speculation. Now, with an expert witness, they're allowed to give their opinions on things. So that's not speculation, because it's already their opinions have been vetted by the attorney. So the jury has a reason to trust that expert witness's opinions, because of the fact that they've gone through the steps of going through their experience and their education and all of the reasons why they should be able to rely on this expert's opinion. However, those opinions are only going to be allowable if they're within the scope of their expertise. So if they ask, if the attorney asks the witness, let's say, for example, the witness is an expert in astrophysics, and then the attorney asks an opinion question having to do with neurosurgery. Although they're there as an expert witness, they can't give their opinion on it just about anything, right? It has to be within their expertise. So like astrophysics, that would be it. Neurosurgery, no, that would be purely speculative, because there's no reason why anyone should be able to rely on their opinion in neurosurgery. Another way that you can successfully have a speculation objection against an expert witness, is if the question is asking about what was in the mind of somebody else. Like literally, like what was, why was this person doing this thing? They may be an expert, but they're not a mind reader, right? They're not Professor X. they can't read somebody's mind, just by sitting next to them. So something that is like asking about like what someone else thought. Sometimes with like psychology, you can kind of get there a little bit. You can sort of massage things to get there. But usually if it's like a straight up question of like, why did this other person do this thing? That's going to properly draw a speculation objection. Okay. I hope that answers that question as well. Carolyn V, yeah, this is a good point. So foundation is why she keeps asking Anne if she reviewed X evidence. Exactly. Did you review the testimony? Did you go over, these videos? Did you, like, this is how someone would know. That's laying a foundation. That's exactly right, Carolyn. Good eye on that. Okay. All right, let's continue on with this.
Hand study is.
Yes.
Did you consider the Rosenhan study in evaluating the credibility of the information you were given in this case?
Now, that's a very different type of situation, not at all analogous to this situation.
Did you consider the possibilities that are outlined in the Rosenhan study in evaluating the witnesses in this case?
Well, again, I didn't specifically do it because that's a study that was done many years ago, and it just so happens I read it many years ago. So I to ask me to even think about it is testing my long-term memory.
Well, I did ask you about 2 days ago when you were in the audience if you were familiar with the Rosenhan
Yes.
study. And since that time, have you thought about the Rosenhan study and its applicability to this case?
Well, that's what I said. I have tested my long-term memory to see what I did remember about it because I read it so long ago.
And what is your understanding of what the Rosenhan study is?
Objection, Your Honor, the witness does not rely on it.
Did you rely upon that study in making any opinions in this case?
No, I did not. No, I did not.
Objection sustained.
Did you choose to ignore the things discussed in the Rosenhan study in your evaluation of this case?
Objection, Your Honor, that's an improper
Question.
Overruled.
Did you choose to ignore it?
I didn't even think about it. I really, as I said, until you brought it to my attention, I hadn't thought about it in probably 10 years.
Are you familiar with the book I'm holding up? It's the DSM-3R.
Yes, I am.
And are you familiar with the concept of malingering?
So wild that she's referring to the DSM-3 or 3R, um, which is just it's funny because we're on what, DSM-5 now. So many modifications have been made since then.
As identified in there, yes, I am.
All right. You were here when I was cross-examining Dr. Tyler, were you not?
Yes, I was.
And you were here when I read this to Dr. Tyler?
Yes, I was.
Without reading it again, did you consider the possibility of malingering in your evaluation of Erik Menendez and what he was telling
That's
you
always-
about what had happened to him?
With these kinds of this kind of testimony, malingering is always going to be something that comes up, right? It is how do we know that the person who has been evaluated to have, a particular affliction, how do we know they're not just lying and pretending and acting like they are? I mean, because everybody knows Erik is this expert actor, as he was an expert actor on the stand because he happened to take high school drama. Another ridiculous point by the state. All right. Oh, and then okay, yeah, let's continue on. Oh, also, hang on a second. There was a question here. Also, Mark Mullins wanted to know, afternoon, first time watching Menendez Mondays. Why was there 3 trials? Well, welcome. We are like what, 58 episodes in. So I apologize if this is a little bit disorienting based on like where we are in the trial. But there were actually, well, technically there were 3 trials. Yeah, because this is the first one, but it's technically 2 for 1, right? This is a BOGO, buy one get one free. They decided to try both cases with 2 separate juries at the same time. The defense really pushed for it, I guess. Because they really wanted to have two different juries for the 2 defendants, but they also wanted to try everything all at once to sort of like make things a bit more efficient. So that's why there were 2 for 1. Then this one ended in a mistrial. So they had a second trial, this time consolidating everything into a single trial, 1 jury deciding the fate for both of them. And that one, as you probably know, ended up convicting them. So that's why. Also, Mary M. question, 3 trials after second trial, would it not be double jeopardy? So the 2 are this one. This is actually 2 trials. Like I said, the third one is the one that convicted. This one, because it ended in a mistrial for both of them, both juries could not agree on whether to convict or acquit either one of them. There's no final determination that's attached to the trial. So the state was able to pursue charges again. So, we were talking about that with the Hannah Gutierrez retrial, right? That, what happens if there's a hung jury, then it ends in a mistrial. Same thing as what happened here. And then the state can choose whether they want to file charges again. But that's up to the state. Here, the state was very, very intent on getting securing a conviction against both of these guys. So they decided to recharge. All right.
I always consider those factors in any evaluation I do.
And in considering malingering, did you also consider his testimony in regards to the attempt to purchase handguns at the Big 5 sporting goods store in Santa Monica?
Objection, asked and answered.
Overruled.
Yes.
Okay, and did you see any correlation between what he told the juries about his attempts to purchase handgun and the concept of malingering as it's defined in this book?
No, I didn't see any evidence of those factors under malingering.
Have you ever driven the route that Erik Menendez and his brother say they took after they killed their parents?
No, I have not driven the route. I'm not sure I could find that route.
You don't
A
live.
lot of people can't find that route.
All right. Well,
Or you mean just drive the freeway?
no, I'm talking about driving from the home to Century City, back to Century City, up to Mulholland and Coldwater, back to Beverly Hills, and into Santa Monica. Have you driven that route?
No, I have not.
Your Honor, I'm going to object.
I will say, driving from Beverly Hills to, did she say Culver City or Century City? If it's Century City, that's not far at all. Like at all. So, and then to Mulholland Drive, that's also on the west side. It's really not that far. If we were talking about going to, I probably should put up a map, but like if we were talking about driving from like Beverly Hills to like Los Feliz, where Dodger Stadium is, and then going, up north to Calabasas, and then coming back down, like that would be quite a route. But like this is, yeah, this is not a crazy route in my opinion.
Object if there's any questions that are going to be asked of fact specific for no foundation.
All right, objection. We'll have to wait until there's another question.
Anticipatory objection.
Now, you understand that the neighbors placed the time of the crime due to their hearing the shotgun noises at between 10 and 10:10 on the night in question.
Yes, that is my understanding.
And you understand as well that at 11:07 p.m. that same night, there was a phone call made on Mr. Menendez's credit card, which Lyle Menendez has admitted that he made from the Santa Monica Civic to his friend Perry Berman.
Yes, I'm aware of that.
So you're familiar with the time period between 10 p.m. and 11:07.
Yes, I am.
Are you also familiar with the testimony of Lyle Menendez in regards to what he did during that period of time?
Yes, I am.
Did you ever in your evaluation consider the possibility that what he said they did could not have occurred in the 67 minutes?
Your Honor, I'm going to object to that. It assumes facts not in evidence.
Overruled.
Did you consider that possibility, Dr. Burgess?
In the time element, no, I did not consider in specifically in the amount of time it takes, and I didn't see that in any police reports recreating that.
Well, until the defendants testified, the police didn't know where the defendants said they went
Your Honor,
after
I'm
the
gonna
crime,
object to
correct?
this as argumentative.
Sustained. Objection sustained.
Dr. Burgess, are you familiar with the concept of suggestibility as it relates to child molest victims?
Yes, I am.
And would you tell the jury what suggestibility is?
Suggestibility is a concept that is introduced that says very young children in the questioning by law enforcement or investigative persons or therapists in some way conduct their interview so as to suggest to the child a response.
And that concept of suggestibility can lead to false accusations of child abuse, correct?
Well, that's never been really carefully reviewed. It certainly is suggested in the literature that that's one thing that happens.
Did you ever do any studies on the McMartin preschool case, Dr. Burgess?
No. Any studies?
Yeah, did you ever read any studies about the McMartin preschool case?
I talked to people, but I didn't study it.
Did you have any interest in the McMartin case?
Your Honor, I'm going to object to this as irrelevant.
Sustained.
Now, the concept of suggestibility then is, according to your definition, the idea that very young children can be led into saying things that are untrue. Would that be correct?
I'm not saying that they're untrue, but they can be suggested because of the way the child's thinking patterns are, very young children, that it can be introduced and a child will agree with it.
Why is it that a very young child then would be susceptible to suggestibility?
Because of their memory development.
Now, do you think an adult facing criminal charges would be open to the notion of suggestibility?
Objection calls for speculation, improper opinion.
Overrule.
I'm not aware of studies on an older population that has really looked at that and suggestibility. In this type of situation, there may be experimental studies, but I'm not aware of any clinical studies.
When was your first contact with Erik Menendez?
August of 1992.
So approximately 15 months ago, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Did you ever ask for any psychiatric reports for him from any other psychological experts who had either examined him or who had treated him?
Well, there were a lot of records that came in from the school department. I had those.
Hang on, guys. Sorry, I've got to I've got to take care of something real quick. I apologize. I will be back in like 2 minutes. All right, I'm back. Sorry about that, guys. One thing that I realized like 15, 20 minutes into the stream is that we started an hour late because I completely forgot about daylight savings time. So, for those of you who are outside of the US, we're going to be starting the stream an hour earlier than like normal. So, not normal than we have previously. So today it technically started at 11 a.m. East Coast time, and I like just completely forgot about that. So that's going to get corrected. So 10 a.m. East Coast time is still the time that we start. It's just going to be what was I going to say? It's just going to be a different time that we start if you are outside the U.S. So that's all I wanted to say about that. All right, let's continue on here. Were there other questions? Let's see here. I will get these in a minute. Okay, I have a few saved, but I'll get to them.
Now, you indicated you spoke with Dr. Vickery.
Yes.
Did you ever get any report from Dr. Vickery?
Well, we discussed his findings, so I did not get a report. No, I have not seen a report.
So in lieu of a written report, there was a verbal report to you. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. Did you ever ask to see the records of Dr. Oziel?
I have seen certainly all of his testimony, and I have seen material that's been introduced here in court,
Have you seen any other
in grand jury.
Yes. Have you seen any other records or notes of Dr. Oziel?
Your Honor, I'd like to approach on this.
Objection overruled. Request is denied.
Oh,
Did you ever see any other notes or records from Dr. Oziel aside from the things that were testified to here in court?
Well, I've seen those materials
Are you
printed
saying-
out.
Are
And-
you saying that you saw a print out of the cassette that he made for those 2 sessions?
Yes, I believe that's what I've seen. Yes.
Are you aware of the
And-
fact that Erik Menendez was undergoing treatment by Dr. Oziel prior to the killings of his parents?
Yes,
Your
I
Honor,
am.
Object to the form of the question assumes the fact not in evidence that what was happening was true.
Overruled. Objection overruled.
Did you ever ask to speak with Dr. Oziel about Erik Menendez's visits to him prior to his parents' killings?
No, I did not.
Why not?
I'm going to object, Your Honor, it's irrelevant.
Overruled.
I just didn't.
Didn't you consider it important to talk to the psychologist who was treating him at or near the time of his parents' deaths?
No, given that I had a lot of material that was already available through many pages of transcripts.
But a psychological, the notes or the an interview with the therapist who was treating him at the time of the killings of his parents would maybe give you some insight into his state of mind.
Objection, argument.
Sustained to the form of the question.
Do you think that a psychologist who was treating him at or near the time of his parents' death would be able to provide you with insight into Erik Menendez's state of mind preceding his parents' killings?
Well, it depends on the type of notes, and my understanding were these were reconstructed notes, so that I'm not sure that that would provide the very best of understanding, and it was material that was available.
Well, who gave you the material?
The material was testified to.
Okay. Who gave you the other material that wasn't testified to?
Well, that was given to me by defense. You mean in terms of the transcriptions and so forth? That was all provided to me.
Did you ever ask them to give you any information that had not been provided to you?
No, they gave me all information as far as I knew that I could see that would be helpful to me. So I feel I have seen all that I need to see regarding Dr. Oziel and
right.
his interaction with the defendant.
And so you never sought to either get notes from Dr. Oziel or to interview him, is that correct?
I don't think that's what I'm saying. I didn't see the need to call him and talk to him. That's correct.
But you thought that the information from the sisters and the siblings of Mr. and Mrs. Menendez was of importance, and you spoke with them directly, correct?
That is true.
Okay, but you chose not to speak to Dr. Oziel.
But I had a lot of materials. I don't think that I was excluded from a lot of material that
I respect her even more for having rejected Dr. Oziel's stuff. We all know his notes were crap. He didn't take contemporaneous notes at all during any of these. He would jot down notes like 2 weeks after the appointment with a client. Ridiculous. Everything about Dr. Oziel is pure quackery, and I respect her even more for rejecting it. Any of his stuff.
I was able to review regarding regarding him.
Were you ever told that you could not have access to Dr. Oziel?
No. Oh, to Dr. Oziel, no.
I believe you indicated that you've testified in the past about 20 to 30 times for the prosecution. Is that correct?
Yes,
Have you testified for the defense before?
yes.
Okay, and how many occasions have you testified for the defense?
I believe about 5 or 10 to 10 times.
Have you ever examined a child and found that that child was not, in fact, in your opinion, the victim of sexual abuse, even though the child claimed to have been?
Oh, yes, and I have written on that.
All right, and what was it? What things do you look for in assessing whether or not a child is telling the truth? Or let me back up. What do you look for in assessing whether or not the child has been abused?
Look for the same things that I've already described. You look for consistency. You look for, with small children, you look for symptoms. You would look for any type of corroborating evidence. You look at the background history. If you have any information on the named abuser, you look at that.
Now,
All of those factors.
and when you've interviewed children and found them not to be telling the truth to you about having been abused, what went into your determination that those children had not been abused?
went into my determination that there was more to what is being stated, and so that we took a position of trying to inquire more into the story and to see why indeed the statement was made. And we would usually try to complete that part of our inquiry so that we were satisfied, and we could then, because it tended to be in a treatment situation, we could make the right type of treatment or recommend the right kind of treatment.
Because if a child claims to have been abused and hasn't been abused, the child still needs some sort of treatment, correct?
Yes, that's what they're generally coming for.
Now, you've indicated that one of the things you consider is why the statement was made. Are you talking about the statement of the self-report of abuse?
Well, it would be the whole statement of the situation that the evaluation contains.
Okay, one of the things you look at, for instance, is in a child custody battle, whether or not the child might be fabricating child abuse in order to go with one parent or another.
So that, yes, child custody situations tend to have a higher rate of what is called the false accusation.
Okay. What about someone who's incarcerated for murder? You think that person might have a reason to make a false accusation of child molestation?
Well, again, that's the context, and that's something that we did talk about yesterday, is that does play an important role in sifting and sorting the information that one is presented, given as much as I am able to gather.
How many adult children, strike that, how many people accused of murder have you interviewed for claims of child abuse?
Well, there was one study that we looked at, I think.
Are you asking how many that
Oh.
she herself?
Yeah, I'm
Oh.
asking you how many you personally have done.
Yeah.
Do you understand the question?
No, do you mean
How many
No.
times have you talked to someone who's incarcerated for murder and claims to have been physically, psychologically, or sexually abused as a child?
Well, there are two parts there. One, we have data on juveniles and have published on that. But second of all, that I personally have talked to, I can think of two
Aside
as
from
juveniles.
okay, two aside from this case.
Right, directly. But again, I've been involved in a study that really looked at juveniles who have, they were incarcerated for murder.
Well, Erik Menendez is not a juvenile. Would you agree with that?
Well, juvenile, correct. Given California, I understand California's laws. Juvenile usually goes by the state as to the age.
The age of majority in the United States is 18,
Yes,
correct?
correct.
And you heard me ask this of Dr. Tyler. We draft young men of the age of 18, correct?
Yeah, I don't think we draft anybody anymore either, so let's ask it
All
a
right.
different way.
We send 18-year-olds to die for their country,
I'm going to
correct?
object to that. We don't do that either.
All right, rephrase the question. Is
Erik Menendez is not a juvenile.
Wow, such a fierce objection from Leslie about like we don't send people to die. I mean, we kind of do. We kind of do. Yes, it's true. Maybe in the early 90s, that was before the global war on terror. Indy. She's focused on Mavi. She's over on the windowsill. I'm about to go and break that up in a second. But anyway, but that was just that was like a very patriotic objection by Leslie. So it was just kind of fun to see.
Correct?
Correct.
And you've given a lot of testimony about children who are abused, correct?
Correct.
But when you interviewed him, he was not a child, correct?
Legally, that's correct.
Okay. In fact, he was almost 22 years old when you interviewed him.
That's correct.
And he was in custody,
Yes,
and he was charged with murder.
that is correct.
Now, since the early 80s, has there been a great deal of literature published about child abuse?
Yes.
And is one of the watershed events that occurred to trigger that generation of literature the McMartin case?
I'm going to object again to reference to the McMartin case unless counsel's role in that case.
counsel, why do you have to make a speech? You have an objection. The objection is argumentative. Objection overruled.
I'm objecting to reference to the
Objection overruled.
Oh, geez.
Is that
He
one
is
of the
done
things
with
that
Leslie
occurred?
again.
That is one of the publicized cases that occurred. That's correct.
And is it your understanding that there is a great deal of literature now available that was not available prior to the early 80s on the issue of child sexual abuse?
Yes, but that's not because of one particular case. It's because more cases are being reported.
Correct.
So there's more to study. So there's therefore more to publish on.
Now, how many different journals are there in existence in the psychological field which deal with the issue of child abuse? And I'm talking about generic child abuse.
I know of one that specifically deals with the generic, and it's called Child Abuse and Neglect.
All right. Are there any other journals that deal with interfamily violence?
Yes,
And what's the name of that journal?
that's the Journal of Interpersonal Violence.
Are there any other journals aside from that one which deal with issues such as child abuse?
There is the Journal of Child Sexual Abuse.
Now, do any of these journals contain articles which give specific anecdotes about specific cases?
Generally not in those journals. They tend to be peer-reviewed for its scientific merit, and there tends to be a reluctance to put in details other than statistical details.
Are there publications available in the public realm which deal with the issue of child abuse and give detailed anecdotes about specific cases of child abuse?
To object, the question is big as to what public realm is.
Overall. Do you understand that?
Yes. Again, and the journals I've just identified I would not consider in the public realm. It's in the professional realm. So if you're expanding it to public, I doubt the public would really have access to those journals unless they were going to go to a library to research.
But if one were a citizen and went to the library to research, one could find those journals, correct?
Only if they have the library subscribed to that.
So if the library subscribed to the journal and one wanted to go look at them, one could, correct?
Yeah, I'm gonna object to this as well.
Well, it
And it
doesn't call for speculation, but it's not relevant. Objection sustained.
Dr. Burgess, are there books which are published which deal specifically with anecdotes about child abuse, which are available in the public realm?
I'm gonna object against the question's called speculation.
Overall.
required.
Objection overruled.
There are books that can be purchased through the public realm.
Which contain specific anecdotes about incidences of child abuse, correct?
Well, that I don't know because I don't tend to read those books, but I really don't know how much anecdotal material is contained in those type of books.
Dr. Burgess, if a person wanted to convince you that they had been sexually abused, one of the things that you would find persuasive would be the amount of detail you were given, correct?
Objection argumentative, calls for speculation about what some other person wants to do.
Overruled.
Well, detail is one of the criteria that one does take into consideration in the evaluation of a statement.
Is it possible for a person to fabricate that kind of detail?
Well, for a person to do that, they would almost have to have a personal reference library to be able to search out that kind of material.
Well, you indicated
Sorry.
that detail was something that you found to be important in assessing the
Sorry, Indy has thoughts, and they're about Mr. White's coming home. Sorry about that. The barking should stop now.
credibility of Erik Menendez, correct?
Yes.
And did you do any kind of psychological testing of Erik Menendez?
I was not asked to. No, I did not.
Did you view any psychological testing of Erik Menendez that others had done?
I haven't seen any specific testing done.
Well, in evaluating his state of mind, did you consider it important to see any psychological testing that had been done?
No, I did not consider that I needed that.
Did you ever diagnose Erik Menendez as having any kind of mental disorder or mental disease?
No, I did not.
And in fact, he does not have such mental disorder or disease. Is that correct?
That is my opinion, yes.
All right. But it's your opinion that he had some sort of condition similar to post-traumatic stress disorder. Is that correct?
Sounds about
no,
right.
Not necessarily. That we were talking more about the fear response. I would not,
It wouldn't surprise me, though, if he did, in fact, have PTSD.
I did not give a diagnosis of what you just said.
All right. So you didn't diagnose him with any kind of disorder or defect or disease. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And you cannot test him for this neurological recoding, correct?
That is correct.
Now, In evaluating Erik Menendez, I believe you indicated that it was your opinion that based upon the abuse that he'd had as a child, that the fear response would have influenced him on the night of his parents' killings, correct?
That is correct.
Did you consider how the fear response worked after the killings in the formulation of the alibi and the statements to the police?
I considered how the fear response worked after the shootings. Yes, that was a major consideration.
Did you consider it significant that after this extremely traumatic event, that Erik Menendez and his brother were able to go back into the room and pick up the shells?
I considered that, yes.
And did you have any psychological explanation for how they were able to do that if they were working on autopilot?
Well, that is one of the post-crime types of behavior that we did talk about, and there are two explanations for that. One we've already discussed of picking up that, but these are decisions that I believed are made after the shootings. So that one is to pick up the guns and the shotgun shells. A second reason is because that is a very they didn't want those there, and what that reminded them of, it certainly reminded them of what had happened.
Did you consider the possibility that they had decided in advance of the crime to pick up the shotgun shells?
I entertain that because one does. That's what one looks at in terms of looking at behavior. What was described to me matches much more in terms of the exhaustion, the waiting for the police, wondering why the police didn't come, with the enormous amount of noise that was made, etc. When that didn't happen, then there was a new behavior that went into play, and that's the post-crime behavior that we've talked about.
Did you consider the statement that Erik Menendez gave to Sergeant Edmonds at approximately 1:20 a.m. on the morning of the 21st of August of 1989?
Yes, I consider all the statements that were made by Erik Menendez to the police to be highly important and significant regarding the fear response.
Okay. Was Erik Menendez in fear when he told the police that he'd gone to see Batman at the Century 14 theaters?
No, not on that statement.
Were there other statements in here in which he was in fear?
There are other statements that indeed speak to his truthfulness in placing him at the scene of the crime.
And you're saying that he intentionally told the police that?
It is my belief that he's being very honest at that, on all of those occasions that comes through.
All right, but he wasn't honest about where he'd been that evening, correct?
That is the one untrue statement that is consistently made, that they do go, both he and his brother go to see a Batman movie.
At the time of the crime. And he, correct?
Well, I don't know whether it's that precise in terms of time. I don't believe that I know that that's the statement they made.
Now I want to back up to your testimony about this sexual abuse. You've indicated that there were certain symptoms that you saw in Erik Menendez which led you to the conclusion, or which supported his statement that he'd been sexually abused, correct?
Yes.
And some of those symptoms were things such as stomach aches and crying and behavior such as that.
Yes.
Can you distinguish in looking at stomach aches and crying whether they're caused by physical abuse, sexual abuse, or psychological abuse?
No.
Okay. And in fact, psychological abuse will cause stomach aches and crying as well as sexual abuse, correct?
Yes.
So the fact that he had those symptoms does not mean that he was sexually abused, does it?
That is true.
It is merely corroborative of some type of abuse.
Yes, and they're just really described as general anxiety symptoms.
Okay. And a child can have those anxiety symptoms without even being abused, can't he?
That is true.
In fact, if a child is nervous about a test or nervous about an event, a stomach ache might be something very probable to find.
Yes.
In examining Erik Menendez and the detail that he gave you in discussing his crime, did you ever do a psychological history of Erik Menendez? In other words, did you take a history of him for purposes of evaluating?
Yes, I took a history of him.
Did you ask him any questions about his sexuality?
Yes.
And did you receive any information from him about his sexuality?
Yes.
And did you consider that information in deciding whether or not the detail he gave you came from a source other than his father.
I took that into consideration.
And did you reject the notion that he could have gotten this information from someone aside from his father?
Yes, I did reject that
And why was that?
because of the information he gave me. There was no other history.
Right. And so you accepted as true what he told you about his sexual history. Is that correct?
Yes, I did.
Now, one of the
Ugh, I hate that line of questioning. I really hate that line of questioning. It's such a 1990s line of questioning, and it's not something that I feel like a prosecutor would be able to get away with today. I hate that.
one of the other symptoms, which I think you indicated you might see in a child who had been abused generically, were outbursts at school. Is that correct?
Yes.
You found no such evidence in this case, did you?
Of outbursts at school. These are usually in young children. No, I did not find any history of outbursts at school.
All right, and you indicated, well,
That was
when you say it's something in young children, you examined his school records from the time of preschool till high school, correct?
Yes,
All right, and you found no such evidence, correct?
that's right.
You indicated that there were problems with his, I think you said his grades, which was indicative to you that perhaps it was corroborative of his statements.
Well, one of the lack of concentration and which was described both by school teachers, coaches. Yes, I did consider that.
The lack of concentration, could you say that that was attributable to psychological, sexual, or physical abuse? Could you say which form of abuse that would be attributable to?
No, you can't, but it is a symptom.
Okay. And his grades and his performance in school, did you ever consider that his poor performance was attributable to his hectic tennis schedule?
No, it was attributed to his performance anxiety and the enormous pressure that he felt under.
Well, so you didn't consider the fact that he was playing tennis all the time and didn't have time to perform in school?
Well, that is pressure that comes from the parents that put this pressure on him to do it because they're the ones that are responsible for driving him around and making sure he's where he's supposed to be.
But even without parental pressure, with the schedule that he had of sports, would you expect him to be able to maintain straight A's?
Objection, Your Honor, that's a relevant question.
Rephrase the question, objection sustained.
Did you consider the fact that his performance in school was in part attributable to the fact that he was concentrating on athletics rather than academics?
Well, no, he said he was concentrating as much as he could on academics and as well as on sports. And given his IQ, it is a little curious that he didn't perform better.
When you say his IQ, what do you mean? Are you aware of what his IQ is?
My understanding is he's certainly in the average to bright range.
Okay, and he would be bright enough to memorize or repeat a tale about himself that wasn't true, isn't he?
Objection, Your Honor, argument.
He is, isn't he?
Well, I will say he's certainly of average intelligence, and how people memorize things usually recall. He possibly. No, I'm not going to
He's smart enough to lie, is what Pam is saying. So he's not so dumb that he can't lie. He's smart enough to lie.
say that I have any evidence of that in terms of his memory and reciting things. I think he tried to do that in one of his courses and had difficulty.
Are you familiar with the testimony of his teacher from Beverly Hills High School that he recited a soliloquy from, I think it was Richard II?
Right, that is the one that he had an opportunity to do it over to her.
And are you familiar with the fact that Erik Menendez had aspirations of becoming an actor?
Of course.
He enjoyed drama lessons. I know that was something cited in the material.
There it
And
is.
are you saying that his intelligence is not sufficient to memorize lines or scenes sufficient to become an actor?
Your Honor, I'm going to object to this. It goes beyond her expertise when it takes to be an actor.
Sustained, rephrase the question.
Yes.
Did you consider his intelligence and his acting in evaluating the truthfulness of the information that he gave you about what had happened to him?
I took that into consideration, yes.
Did you reject those?
Yes, essentially, yes.
Have you ever done any studies on families where the children are raised to be sports stars, like tennis stars or ice skating champions or things like that?
No.
Have you ever read any studies about those kinds of families and what sacrifices they make?
No.
I believe that you indicated one of the other things that you found significant is that the family was a secretive family. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Are all families that are secretive families where sexual abuse goes on?
No.
Now, the things and the symptoms, the details that Erik Menendez told you and the symptoms that you saw in him were not unique. Would that be fair to say?
No, they're common, that there are symptoms that are commonly seen in abused children. So
All
they're
right.
not unique per se. They fit a pattern.
So if I came to you and told you that I had been sexually molested, you would expect detail from me, correct?
Not necessarily. It depends on the person's age. It depends on how recent the event was. Now, you have to take a lot of other factors into consideration when you're looking at memory.
But if I gave you detail, you would find that corroborative of the truth of what I was telling you, correct?
That's one of the factors one looks at, yes.
And if I were to read literature about child abuse, I could tell you that I was having nightmares, correct?
Your Honor, this is argumentative and there's no foundation. It's
Sustained
improper
as to the form of the question.
Dr. Burgess, nightmares is a classic symptom of child abuse, correct?
Yes, it's one of the symptoms.
Stomach aches are a classic symptom of child molesting, is that correct?
But these are general anxiety symptoms. That's what has to be looked at, is that they can also be found in other populations, but it does point to some stress or something, some anxiety that's existing.
And if I were going to tell you that I had been abused, then the presence of those types of things would be corroborative. Is that correct?
Well, not necessarily. You have to look at many more things, and that's what I'm trying to say, is you just don't take one bit of information. You have to put it in the total picture.
If I gave you details of specific instances, I told you I had nightmares, I told you that I had stomach aches, that would be corroborative of my claim that I'd been abused, correct?
It would be one factor that I would look at. I'd also look at your affect and how you motion, how you told it, a lot of other aspects.
Now, I take it, and I've asked you this previously, but you did review the testimony of Erik Menendez when he was cross-examined by Mr. Kuriyama about purchasing the handguns, correct?
Asked and answered, and again misstates the evidence.
Attempting to purchase handguns?
Yes,
Objection overruled.
Yes,
and you found that testimony to be credible, is that correct?
yes,
And if they do not sell handguns at the Big Five sporting goods store, do you
Yes.
still find that to be credible?
yes, I do.
Did you see the detail into which Mr. Menendez went in describing the weapon that he had chosen to purchase?
Yes.
And did you consider that to be a lie?
No, I did not consider that to be a lie, the detail.
Did you consider that there would have been no discussion at the Big Five about a 14-day waiting period for a weapon they did not sell?
Objection, Your Honor,
consider
this
that?
is counsel's argument, argumentative.
Rephrase the question.
Did you think to yourself, gee, how could he have gone to buy a handgun and been told there was a 14-day waiting period for something that they didn't carry? Did you think
Again,
that to yourself?
argumentative, Your Honor.
Right, objection sustained.
Dr. Burgess, why is it that you found that particular testimony to be explicable as credible?
The reason I found that to be credible is that, first of all, it didn't have to be revealed. Second of all, that's a peripheral detail, if you will. The name of the store is a peripheral detail from the intent, which was stated to purchase a handgun or to purchase a weapon. So given the fact that it was volunteered when it didn't have to be volunteered, and as noted the second being the peripheral detail, but even more important, I think, is the record from the Lewis School that says that he had a difficulty, certainly at age 15, with dysnomia, which is a tendency not to state the right name and so forth. Those were the factors that went into my decision to believing that he went to a store to purchase with the intent to purchase a handgun for protection.
Does dysnomia cause one to hear things that aren't said?
It's the naming of something. I was talking about the name of the store.
Right. My question is, does dysnomia cause a person to hear things that are not said?
I don't know.
Does dysnomia cause you to lie?
Objection, Your Honor. Argumentative.
Dysnomia has a tendency but for the person not to name the correct store in this case.
Dr. Burgess, do you consider it significant in looking at planning activity that weapons are purchased in advance of the crime?
It depends on the intent of purchasing a weapon.
If one is intending to kill someone, do you consider it important that weapons were purchased in advance of the crime?
In a hypothetical, if that's the intent of purchasing a gun,
Right. Would you expect someone who was trying to avoid responsibility to try to explain away the purchase of guns prior to a homicide?
well, I think there is an explanation for why the guns were purchased.
But if the explanation is untrue, that doesn't negate the purchase of the weapons, does it?
Objection, argumentative.
The question is ambiguous. You have to rephrase it. Objection sustained.
Dr. Burgess, you said that one thing that convinced you that Erik Menendez was telling the truth about attempting to purchase handguns is that he didn't have to reveal it, correct?
Yes,
Did
correct.
you consider that he might have to explain why shotguns were purchased the 2 nights before the murders?
Yes.
Did you consider that was something that he had to explain away in this trial in order to avoid any signs of planning?
Well, it would be a question that would be asked.
And did you also understand that the alibi that was set up in the afternoon of the 20th of August also had to be explained away?
Objection, Your Honor. That assumes facts not in evidence. That's argument.
I think I've said I don't see that as an effective plan. Didn't work.
Dr. Burgess, just because a plan doesn't work doesn't mean it isn't an effective plan.
Argumentative, Your Honor, and that's been asked 6 times.
Overruled.
Oh, I'm wrong.
Rephrase the question, however. as
Yeah, I was going to
follows.
say that's not a question. She's just
That
making a
is, it's
statement.
repetitive.
Dr. Burgess, did you consider that in this particular case, there were 2 pieces of evidence that would have to be explained away by the defendants, the purchase of the guns and the contact with Perry Berman prior to the murders?
Well, those are 2 factors, yes.
And those are 2 factors which could hypothetically show premeditation, couldn't they?
They might be construed that way, yes.
They might be construed that way.
Yes, it depends on which theory you are operating under and why the person is purchasing the guns.
But if in fact the purchase of the guns 2 hours away using false identification is in fact incriminating, then one might feel compelled to try to explain that away, correct?
Your Honor, argumentative.
Sustained.
compound.
Objection sustained.
May we have our morning break, please?
Well, how much longer do you have?
I can probably finish by noon.
All right, we'll take a 10-minute break. Place to make it 9 minutes. Let's get back at 10 minutes.
Make it 9 minutes.
Dr. Burgess, one of the things an expert such as yourself considers in evaluating claims of child sexual abuse is the medical history of that child. Is that correct?
It may be one factor, yes.
And in fact, in this case, did you examine the medical history of Erik Menendez to see if you could corroborate what he told you?
I did not examine him medically.
Did you examine his medical records?
Yes,
I swear she already asked about this. Like at least once, maybe twice.
through childhood and on up, yes.
And you've indicated that there is an entry dealing with injury to the soft palate, uvula, and pharynx, correct?
That's correct, yes.
Did you find any other injuries or any other physical injuries in his childhood medical records which would corroborate his claim of sexual abuse?
That was the one that was an unexplained injury. That's the only one, and the other history in those 3 pages had a series of sore throats. Those were the only other aspects of that record, office visit records. No, I did not find anything other than what you've just identified, plus a lot of sore throats.
Okay. Sore throats do not mean the child's been sexually abused today.
No, sore throats don't, but if you have that unexplained injury and then you have a series of sore throats, it certainly is information that can be considered
Did you see any information in his medical history indicating that he'd ever had any lower gastrointestinal examinations?
No, I don't believe I saw any GI disorders, gastrointestinal disorders.
Do you remember it contained within his medical records, there's reference to him being given a GI to evaluate a stomach ache and an evaluation of his bowel. Do you remember seeing that in his medical records?
No, I don't remember that.
If that kind of information were available to you, would you look at it to see if there was any abnormality to the bowel?
Not necessarily to the bowel.
No indication when this was done.
Well, just in general, the question is, would she have examined it? Your answer.
Would you consider that significant in looking for indicia
What happened? Oh, why did it
of
pause?
sodomy?
Not with,
Oh, you know what? Hang on. It's my earbuds really quick. Hang on. Okay. Now we should be good.
GI disturbance, not necessarily.
They connected to the wrong device. So they like disconnected from my computer and then connected to another thing just because they wanted to.
Approach, please.
Yes.
Can I see if something's going to be shown? Okay. All right.
You provided with the information contained in the document I'm showing you, which is a written transcription of office notes from the pediatric group in Princeton.
Yes,
And you're familiar with the first entry on this page, correct?
yes, I am.
And that is the incident that you referred to dealing with the damage to the pharynx, among other things.
That is correct.
And the note indicates that the patient, which was Erik Menendez, was seen in the emergency room the day prior to this notation. Is that correct?
Yes.
All right. Did you ever ask to see the emergency room notes of that particular visit?
My understanding is they were not available, that they did try to get them. I mean, I would have looked at them if they were available. I have not seen them.
Right. So you have not seen the emergency room notes from that visit, correct?
From the previous day
From-
you're talking about?
Yes, from the previous day, from the emergency room visit.
Yes, but I have a reason for why I do not believe they're available.
Okay, but you haven't seen them, correct?
No,
Right. Now, I believe you indicated one of the things that could have caused that injury would have been a penis. Is that correct?
it could have been.
Were there other things that could have caused that injury?
It would have been something inserted into the mouth. It could have been a stick.
Well, you don't know whether the injury was a burn or not, do you?
A burn?
Yes, a burn.
No, I don't know if it was a burn.
And if it was a burn, then that would be inconsistent with a penis, wouldn't it?
If it was a burn and they had identified it and there was a description of it, that would be inconsistent with a sexual injury.
Okay, and there, you have no description aside from what is contained in this particular report. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And the only description of injury is hurt, H-U-R-T, correct?
Yes, but hurt generally means injury.
Right. But that's the only indication you have is that there's a hurt.
Yes.
And there's no identification whether it's a burn or a laceration or a bruise.
That would have been described in that report there. There would have been more description if they had that amount of detail, I believe. And it was 3 areas of the throat.
So what are you saying about what it would have said?
It should have said if any of those factors that you just identified, that if by hurt, it would have been described what type of hurt, by burn, by etc. It's not identified there.
So you can't extrapolate at all from that what was the source of the injury, correct?
That's correct.
And you found nothing else aside from sore throats in his childhood medical history to corroborate a claim of sexual abuse. Is that correct?
That's what I've just said.
And you did not apprise yourself of the results of the physical exam which was conducted upon him before you came to testify with the colposcope.
No, that's been described in general. I did identify that was, I was given information on that.
You were not given specific information about the results, however, were you?
No, because they're going to be presented.
And you didn't consider it important to know the precise results of that physical examination before you rendered your opinion, correct?
I do believe I got information regarding that I've already said, that there was no way to determine consistently that there was a link to sodomy.
Are you saying that there was no physical injury found? There was no sign of physical injury found?
That could be linked specifically to anal injury, yes.
Now, you've indicated as well that one of the things you consider significant in this case are the two photographs which were on the board yesterday, correct?
Yes,
Okay. How do you know that Mr. Menendez took those photographs?
I don't know who took those photographs.
Okay.
I know that somebody in the family did.
Have you ever seen a child take a photograph?
I've seen children. What age?
8-year-old children. Have you ever seen an 8-year-old child handle a camera?
Your Honor, I'm going to object to this as completely irrelevant, no foundation.
Overall,
8-year-olds, if they have a camera, may take cameras, but I'm not familiar with how 8-year-olds take pictures.
Do you think an 8-year-old has the cognitive development, a normal 8-year-old has the cognitive development sufficient to point and click a camera?
Yes,
All right. And so you have no specific information aside from what you were told by the defendants that those pictures were in fact taken by their father.
that is correct.
And you're familiar with the fact that the photographs are interspersed with photographs at Erik Menendez's 6th birthday party.
That is correct.
Okay, and those photographs at the 6th birthday party do not contain any naked children, correct?
At the party, that's correct.
I believe you talked about child molesters in general, and you spoke about Jose Menendez, and you indicated that his personality and the way he ran his business and the way he ran his family, and I don't want to put words in your mouth. So was that consistent with your view of him as a child molester, or inconsistent, or what?
Consistent with someone who is autocratic, very controlling, very domineering, is used to getting what he wants, is able to silence people, to be able to keep information very controlled. Those are the factors I would identify, and those are factors that are necessary for any child molester to be able to continue incestuous behavior.
So would you say that all child molesters who are engaged in incestuous behavior are autocratic?
No, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that those are some of the characteristics that would be given in terms of the patterns and the profiles of someone. They are consistent with someone who would be able to do this to their son.
There is no profile of typical child molester, is there, Dr. Burgess?
The profiles generally get into what's called fixated and regressed, and it does identify within those categories. There is material based on research that is in the literature.
Are you familiar with the testimony of one of the prior witnesses that there is no one of the prior expert witnesses that there is no profile of a child molester?
Well, again, it depends on what you're defining as profile. Characteristics are generally useful in describing.
There are child molesters who are not autocratic, correct?
Yes,
And there are child molesters who do not deal with the world in the same way that Mr. Menendez did, correct?
yes.
And those people are able to engage in incestuous interfamily relationships, correct?
Yes, but they will have characteristics that are quite different from what we see in this case, and they still are able to maintain the secrecy to pressure the child and to ensure that, to isolate their child. There's still a lot of things that persons that are not necessarily as, from a business standpoint, skilled, able to do.
You talked a lot about isolation as something that is achieved by a child molester to keep the child quiet. Now, did you study Mr. Menendez with a view to determining what kind of personality he had?
I looked at all the material as to how he was described by others who knew him, yes.
Okay. Are you aware of the fact that Mr. Menendez and his wife sent their son to a psychologist?
Yes, I am.
Okay. Can you explain to me why a child molester would send his child to a psychologist?
Well, for several reasons. One, it was part of the probationary aspect. Second of all, and I think probably most importantly, that a waiver was given by their son, that information could be given directly by the psychologist to the family. And also the family were being seen in part in sessions.
Dr. Burgess, the waiver was a 1-month waiver from January the 18th until February the 18th of 1989.
Your Honor, I would object to that. It's argumentative and it misstates Dr. Aziel's testimony.
All right, you're referring to a particular document?
Yes, Exhibit 127.
Rephrase the question to objection sustained as to the form of the question.
Are you familiar with an exhibit in this trial that's been testified about, which I showed to Dr. Tyler when you were in the courtroom, which was a waiver of confidentiality signed by Erik Menendez?
Yes, I am.
And that waiver was for a 1-month period, correct?
That is correct.
And you're aware of the fact that Erik Menendez saw Dr. Aziel for a considerable period of time before that waiver was executed.
Yes, I am.
Now, in your study of child molesters, and I take it you've studied child molesters as well as child abuse victims, correct?
Yes.
What is the frequency of a child molester being a heterosexual, a pedophile, and a homosexual?
Whoa.
Excuse me, Your Honor, I think the question's vague. All three at once or
Yes.
among
You
those?
understand the question?
Like, wow, that's a 1990s question. That is a 1990s question for sure.
Oh, not really.
Okay.
Okay.
Dr. Burgess, if Jose Menendez was having sex with his son, his pre-adolescent son, he would be considered to be a pedophile, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And why do pedophiles, in your opinion, have sex with children?
For issues of dominance and power, those are the primary factors, even though it does occur in a sexual context.
In addition to having dominance and power, do pedophiles find children sexually exciting?
Pedophiles do, yes.
Are you aware of the fact that Jose Menendez had an affair with a woman, an adult woman, during at least 8 years of his marriage?
Yes, I am.
And you're aware of the fact that he had relationships with his wife as well?
Yes, it's been introduced in the record, yes.
Okay.
I'm not sure
Well,
that's a fact.
she had 2 children, so he had sex with her
Yes.
twice.
Well,
Yes.
I'm going to object to that, Your Honor, as irrelevant to the question.
Objection overruled. Objection.
Okay, so we know he engaged in heterosexual conduct, correct?
Yes.
And if Erik Menendez is to be believed, he engaged in pedophilic conduct, correct?
I'd call it incestuous behavior.
But it also means he's a pedophile. He's a child molester.
Well, it does extend into adolescence.
And once that behavior extends into adolescence, he is then engaged in homosexual conduct, correct?
No, then the term is hebephile.
Then the term is pedophile.
Hebephile.
Okay. What about when his son becomes an adult? Is that called homosexual behavior?
Well, the hebephile has a latitude to usually ranges in the teens. I'm not aware that it didn't continue past 18. Still in the teens.
Okay. What is the frequency of someone being a child sexual abuser, a pedophile, and a heterosexual? How often does that occur?
Oh, the mixed categories can occur. Now, what I can't give you is precise definitions or statistics on that. It has been studied in other people's research who really do try to find out truthfully from offenders. This is not easy information to obtain, but there certainly are mixed categories.
Yeah, I'm confused as to why Pam is confused about the existence of bisexuality. Like that was that was a thing that people I know talked about in the 90s, even if it maybe wasn't so accepted. Like today, it's like, I mean, it's very much a non-issue in a lot of parts, at least. But it's just like, how can someone possibly go over here and also go over here? How could that possibly? That's impossible. That's impossible. It's like, I don't know. It's just bananas to me. This aspect, this turn of questions by Pam is just so ridiculous.
And they have terms for it.
All right. Of all 3 of those particular incidences, that is the child, the adult, and the heterosexual behavior.
Yes.
Is that common?
Again, I don't know the percentage, but that certainly is reported in the literature. It's not necessarily that uncommon that there'd be a wide range of behaviors aimed at different ages as well as different sexes.
It might be common for him to
Also, yeah, just pointing out a few things that folks are saying here. Let's see here. Or at least one, right? Yeah. Yeah, your everyday sheep, it has also been well documented that heterosexual men can abuse children of the same sex, and it has nothing to do with sexuality. Yeah, I mean, there's all kinds of other things that can come into play. Tish, I'm pretty sure the cross-dressing and homosexuality is a diagnosis in DSM-3. I wouldn't be surprised if these philias are in there too. See, that's something that, it could very well be the case. I haven't looked to see, if DSM-3 makes an official diagnosis of that, but I do recall homosexuality being something that was worthy of a diagnosis back in the day. I can't remember if it was if it was also in the 1990s, like they considered it like a psychological like issue rather than just a sexual orientation. Um so, I mean, nowadays to be like, "Oh, is this person a pedophile? Does that mean they're homosexual? Is this person homosexual and that means they're a pedophile?" Like that's just the kind of thing that is not uh generally speaking, it's not widely accepted anyway.
him to be a child molester and a heterosexual, correct?
Yes.
And it might be common for him to be a homosexual and a child molester, correct?
Again, you're getting into area that's called same sex and heterosexual. And this is very hard to speculate on without him and having any history on him. We can only look at the behavior that you're describing. So there are those features that you've just described. It's a mixed.
Well, the
Group.
behavior is reported by the heterosexual behavior is from people who are either deceased or are not in custody, correct?
The heterosexual behavior. I'm not sure there's been.
Also, Ingrid Fitz, that's a really good point here. Remember that at this time AIDS epidemic was going strong and there was a huge amount of homophobia. Yeah, that's also something that's important to keep in mind.
On more than the wife. It's been alluded to,
Yes,
but
Yes.
I'm not aware that somebody has testified to that.
correct. And you have no reason to believe that he did not engage in a heterosexual extramarital affair, correct?
Well, it has been stated that that's what the mother was concerned about.
And the information you received about the pedophilic and the conduct with the adolescent and adult is from Erik Menendez, correct?
That is correct.
Who is incarcerated for murder.
That is correct.
Okay. Now, if a child is sexually abused, does that mean that child can never premeditate?
Premeditate what?
Premeditate a crime such as murder.
Your Honor, this is argument.
Overruled.
Does the fact that you've been sexually abused mean you are unable with your cognitive skills to premeditate?
No.
Okay, so people who are sexually abused still have the capacity to plan and execute a murder.
Well, you have to see what the circumstances are. Again, you'd have to look at each act to see. I would never make a blanket statement without seeing some facts.
Well, the blanket statement is that people who are sexually abused still may have the capacity to premeditate, correct?
I said yes.
And the sexual abuse does not wipe out their capability to do that, does it?
No.
And sexual abuse can cause anger in abuse victims, can't it?
It's been described as anger at what's being done to them, yes.
Okay, and anger can build up over a period of time, correct?
Yeah, but it's not necessarily always anger. Remember, it can have other elements in it. It isn't, you can never make a causal statement that it will be anger. It depends on the nature of the act.
Dr. Burgess, all I asked you is if anger can be a function of having been sexually abused.
Object to the form of the question is argument.
Re-ask the question, please.
Now, Dr. Burgess, are you an advocate in this case?
No, I don't believe I'm an advocate in this case.
And you're not an advocate for Erik Menendez?
No, I've been called upon to evaluate and render an opinion in this case.
Did you ever contact the prosecution to see if the prosecution had anything to add that you should consider?
Your Honor, I'm going to object to that under 115 and other rules. That's an
Overruled.
inappropriate question.
Overruled.
No, I didn't. I didn't realize that that was possible.
But you've testified for the prosecution 20 or 30 times in the past, haven't you?
Yes.
And did you ever ask, gee, should I call the prosecutors and ask them if they have anything to add to my analysis?
But I had so much information from the prosecution. I had all of the grand jury. I felt in the beginning I really had much more from the prosecution statement of case than even from the defense's.
Now, you indicated that one of the 5 factors that you consider significant in leading to Erik Menendez's state of mind on the night of the homicide was the triggering event of Erik Menendez's father indicating to him that he would have to stay at home during his tenure at UCLA on occasion.
Yes.
Remember that?
Yes, I do.
Okay. Now, you indicated that you had a lot of material from the prosecution in this case. Is that correct?
I had a lot of material from both sides.
Did you consider the report of a man named Ed Fenno in making that assessment that this was a triggering event?
I'm not getting the relationship. Could you help a little bit more?
I'm
Mr.
going to object to
What?
helping a little bit more, Your Honor. I'd like to approach.
Your Honor, I don't see the necessity to approach. May I
Well,
show
I
her the
see the
report?
You can show the witness the report, certainly.
I have here a report.
Let's see what part you want. I'd like to approach on this, Your Honor.
Well, at this point, if this is a report that the witness has seen, she can look at it.
Dr. Burgess, I'm showing you a Beverly Hills Police Department 2-page report. I'm showing you page 2. The report, first of all, the report was prepared on the 4th of June of 1993. Did you receive any police reports after this date?
I'm not sure I got that late reports. I had all the early reports. So I'll have to look at this to see whether I've seen it. Yes,
Have you seen this report?
I think I have.
Okay, and the information contained in the report, did you read it?
Yes,
Did you consider it in your evaluation of item number 1 of the 5 factors that went into Erik Menendez's state of mind?
yes.
And in the report, Mr. Fendo
I'm going to
indicates-
object to any hearsay from the report, Your Honor. I'd like to approach.
All right,
Offer
you may
for-
do so. All right, you may proceed.
May I approach again, please, Your Honor?
Yes.
Showing you this report again, I'd like to ask you, did you consider this report at all, especially the part that's in yellow?
Your Honor, that question has been asked.
Overall,
Yes,
Did you consider that in forming your opinion as to factor number 1?
yes,
And you did consider it.
yes.
Did you reject it?
Well, I don't see it as inconsistent with what my statement is.
All right, well, the fact that Mr. Menendez wanted Erik Menendez to go
Well,
to
I'm going to object to reading that report because she still hasn't indicated that she.
objection
relied.
overruled.
The report indicates that Mr. Fenno was present when Mr. Menendez became upset because Erik Menendez had turned down his acceptance at Berkeley.
Yes,
All right. Now, you didn't consider that significant in assessing Erik Menendez's state of mind.
well, I don't see where that statement of the father makes is, and it's reported by Mr. Fenno, in any way negates the fact that where he wanted to go to school, where the son wanted to go to school.
Erik Menendez testified, and I assume told you that, I'll return, Your Honor. Erik Menendez testified and told you, I assume, that when his father said he had to stay home a couple of nights a week when he attended UCLA, it was for the purpose of his father continuing the sexual molestation.
Yes,
The fact that his father wanted him to go to school at Berkeley, do you consider that inconsistent with his father's desire to have him stay home to engage in sexual relations?
well, it doesn't say that his father wasn't happy with him going to UCLA. He makes just that one statement on Berkeley, excuse me, on Berkeley. And he fully intended to go to UCLA and live in the dorm. And that was his wish and his dream and his, that I think is what the important point is that he gets to choose where he wants to go.
Dr. Burgess, Mr. Menendez wanted his son to go to school
I'm
in the
gonna
San Francisco
check
area,
your-
according to this report. If this report's true,
Objection to the form of the question is
Exactly.
sustained. It's argumentative. You have to rephrase the question if you want to pursue this.
Dr. Burgess, this particular report indicates, does it not, that Mr. Menendez was upset with Erik for turning down Berkeley?
That's what it says, yes.
And if that is true, that he was upset,
Mhm.
how do you reconcile that with Erik Menendez's statement that his father wanted him to stay home a couple of nights a week while he attended UCLA?
Well, that's a whole different set of circumstances when he's now talking about wanting to go to UCLA and the father gets into going over his courses and all of that. Uh, I just don't see those as two. I see them as very separate decisions and statements.
Did you consider in evaluating Mr. Fenno's report that it would be difficult for Mr. Menendez to continue to have sexual relations with his son if his son were 400 miles away?
Yes.
And did you reject that idea?
In that kind of context, yes.
So
Also, I mean, there's been testimony in this trial so far, at least, whether I mean, maybe you believe Lyle, maybe you don't, but there has been evidence, even outside of, I guess, Lyle's testimony that, um, that Mr. Menendez would regularly drop in on Lyle when he was at Princeton, which is all the way across the country. I mean, if you've ever flown from LA to San Francisco, that is like spitting distance away by plane. Like it's literally a commuter flight that you take to get up there. So, the distance between the two sounds far, but with the finances and the means that were available to the Menendez family, that's really not far at all.
that the fact that the father wanted his son to go to Berkeley is not inconsistent in your view with Erik Menendez's state of mind that his father wanted him to stay home.
Your Honor, I'm going to object to the form of the question.
Sustained.
Okay, now, Dr. Burgess, I believe you indicated that you did examine the medical records of Erik Menendez in order to determine what kind of childhood traumas he had suffered, correct?
That's correct.
In addition, you looked at the medical records to see, and I believe you even testified, about how Mrs. Menendez reacted or related to the medical professionals or others who were treating her son.
Objection, Your Honor, there's been no such testimony.
Yes, I believe you indicated.
All right, wait, one thing at a time. Objection sustained. You may
And if
rephrase the
counsel's
question.
going to show something to the witness, I'd like to have it
All right.
shown
That's
to
proper.
me.
Pam's getting stuck in the weeds here a little bit. Objections getting sustained on
I'm
her.
going to object to this document being shown.
All right, first of all, it may be shown to the witness to see whether or not she's seen it, considered it, and relied upon it.
Well, I'm going to ask to approach on this issue because of the preceding question, Your Honor, and because of previous rulings.
No, it's clearly something that can be, at least at this stage, a foundation established. So I want that to be established first.
Did you review records dealing with treatment of Erik Menendez for speech pathology problems? I'm showing you a letter that's actually a discharge report.
Yes, I know that he had that back in the 70s when he was 8 or 9 years old.
And did you review these records and determine that he did in fact receive speech therapy?
Yes, he did.
Okay. And did you ever see this letter, the second page of which contains a statement
I'm
from?
going to object to the reading of
I'm
the
not
statement.
reading the statement.
All right, let's have the question.
Did you in fact look at this sentence dealing with a statement made by the person who did the treatment?
Yes.
Okay. And in looking at the information contained therein, did it in any way affect your opinion as to the caregiving nature of Mrs. Menendez?
Yes.
And what effect did this have on your opinion?
Well, the effect that had on my opinion is it confirmed that she is both parents are very concerned about how their child presents himself to the outside world, especially that he is able to speak clearly. So I can see that as very compatible with what they would want and that image of the family. So that does not surprise me at all that that statement is in the notes.
Yeah,
Effect
that
on the
makes
fact
sense.
Mrs. Menendez was cooperative.
Yes, that's quite consistent with what I would expect on that particular type of treatment.
Did you ever consider the idea that maybe Mrs. Menendez wanted to get help for her son? Just because she wanted to get help for him?
Well, I think she did want to get help for her son in that particular area, yes.
But I take it you read into it that the help for her son was really for her own self-aggrandizement, correct?
I don't think I said that.
Well, you did say, didn't you, that it was because of how the outside world would view the family.
Yes, and the outside world does look at how a child presents itself, and especially how a child speaks.
You're aware of the fact that he was sent to the Lewis School, correct?
Yes,
You're aware of the fact that he had tutoring when he was at Beverly Hills High School, correct?
yes.
And did you ever consider that perhaps the parents just genuinely cared about their son? Was that ever part of your consideration?
Well, they certainly did care about certain aspects. I don't think that's ever been, I've ever denied that.
I believe you indicated that in your evaluation, Jose Menendez was adept at mind games, correct?
Yes.
Did you ever see any evidence that he had passed that on to his sons?
Karen, I'm gonna check the question.
Rephrase the question.
You indicated that Jose Menendez was adept at mind games, correct?
Yes,
And you're aware of the fact that Jose Menendez continually drilled his children during the course of their youth and adolescence, correct?
that's correct.
Okay. Did you ever consider that Erik Menendez might be playing mind games with you when you interviewed him at the county jail?
Well, that's one of the things that goes into a complete assessment. I mean, all of those factors that we've been talking about, one would try to sift and sort through to see what and why the person is saying what they're saying.
I believe you indicated in your evaluation, one of the things you did is you read the psychotherapeutic notes from Mrs. Menendez's treatment, correct?
That's correct.
And you considered those notes to be very significant.
They're certainly important in terms of her state, her condition at the time that she was in therapy. Yes.
All right, if Mrs. Menendez's psychotherapeutic notes were important as to her state of mind,
Yes.
why didn't you ask Dr. Oziel for his reflections on Erik Menendez's state of mind at or near the time of the killings?
We're back to Oziel again. Really? Like this is like a Kuriyama cross-examination at this point. We're just circling around and around and around and around and around and around and around forever until we die. Like this is just ridiculous. How many times she's like kind of revisiting certain topics again and going around. I would love for her answer to this question to be because Dr. Oziel is a quack and should have his license revoked.
Well, I think I had that information in all the material I looked at. You mean personally call him?
Yes.
No, I felt I had adequate information. Plus, I had already evaluated my opinion on the information I had in terms of notes, etc.
You had already made up your mind.
Well, that's one of the things one does as one goes through information to see is to make some type of evaluation of it.
Did you ever consider that the information contained in the notes you did have of Dr. Oziel was in fact true? Did you ever consider that the crime was committed in the way described in Dr. Oziel's notes?
I don't think the crime was committed in the way it was revealed in Dr. Oziel's notes. That's correct.
Why did you reject that?
I rejected that because of the way it was presented. I rejected that because I don't think he was hearing what he was hearing and the way he stated it. These were reconstructed kinds of notes, and I found that very interesting that he didn't have actual notes, so that I really did not find them credible.
But you never even talked to the man, did you?
That's correct, I didn't.
And she's better
You were
for it.
familiar with the fact that during their testimony, both of the defendants affirmed that much of what Dr. Oziel testified to was correct.
Objection, Your Honor, argumentative.
Overruled.
Are you familiar with that fact,
And
Dr. Burgess?
Also misstates the testimony.
Overruled.
Yeah, how are you?
Okay, do you want me to rephrase the question?
Yes, please.
When Erik Menendez and his brother Lyle testified,
Yes.
and they were asked specific questions about Dr. Oziel's recitation of those two sessions,
Yes.
they affirmed many of the conversations which Dr. Oziel had related to the jury.
Yes, my understanding.
Objection, that's not a question.
Was that in the form of a question?
Yes, I
Did you
should have.
understand it as such?
I think I was going to answer it.
Okay,
Yeah.
then you must have. Go ahead.
My understanding of the testimony is there were parts of it, but certainly not in the way that it was described. And if I remember correctly, there was more disagreeing with statements that came in when Erik Menendez was asked about it than confirming. So I really would rather be a little bit more specific than to make a blanket statement that they affirmed it.
Did you find any instances where they, either one of them in their testimony, affirmed a specific statement of Dr. Oziel?
Yes, they went to see him. They did have meetings with him. I mean, some of those facts they did affirm.
And they also affirmed some of the content of those meetings, correct?
On some of the content, that's correct.
And those were the content which tended to minimize their responsibility for their act, correct?
Objection, Your Honor, that's argumentative. It
Sustained.
misstates.
Objection sustained as to the form of the question.
Dr. Burgess, I've asked you previously about the fact that you're familiar with Erik Menendez's, the fact that he acted in some in high school, correct?
My understanding is he took a drama course that was required. Are you referring to something else?
Yes. No, I'm referring to the drama course. You're familiar with the fact that he took drama.
Yes, but it's a required course.
Are you familiar with the fact that he wrote screenplays?
Yes.
Did you consider the screenplays in any of your evaluation of his mental state on the night of August the 20th?
No, I did not.
So you didn't find what he had written to be significant, is that correct?
That is correct.
Turning now to the 5 factors which you say led up to Erik Menendez's state of mind on the night of the killing. And Your Honor, I'm not going to finish before lunch, so
Well, how much longer do you have?
probably 20 minutes.
We'll keep going for a little while.
All right. Turning now to the 5 factors. One of them is that the father had insisted that Erik Menendez continue to live in the home.
Correct.
And you reached this conclusion in spite of the fact that the father had apparently wanted his son to go to Berkeley.
Objection, argumentative.
Sustained.
You reached this conclusion in spite of the information in the Ed Fenno interview. Is that correct?
Objection, Your Honor, the Ed Fenno interview is asked and answered.
Objection overruled.
Correct?
Yes, correct.
Right. You indicated that one of the second factor was his disclosure of his sexual abuse and suffering to his brother after witnessing his brother's humiliation at the hands of his mother, correct?
That's correct.
Would witnessing that particular event cause these hormones to be triggered in Erik Menendez?
The witnessing of that was certainly an abusive, humiliating act when the hair was literally pulled off. And that certainly did shock, surprise, get a reaction. Whether that was, what it certainly did do was to trigger enough of a response that he did tell his brother about his own abuse by the father.
If someone,
So-
I'm sorry, had you finished?
So in that respect, it certainly did raise something that he had been withholding for a long time to the surface for him to be able to talk about it.
If someone is hypervigilant because of the change in the hormones, wouldn't you expect that that kind of traumatic, assaultive behavior would have triggered this fear response in Erik Menendez the night he saw that occur?
No, not with his brother, no.
So witnessing assaultive behavior is not a cue that would trigger that kind of response?
Well, it's an identification with his brother. He now realizes his brother also was being similarly treated in certain respects, and that would create more of a closeness.
Okay, but in your testimony here today, then, that kind of situation would not trigger this fear response, correct?
There is a cumulative aspect. That in and of itself alone would not. That's correct.
The third factor that you indicated was that Erik Menendez learned that his brother had had a confrontation with the father and what the father had said during that confrontation, correct?
Yes, correct.
Would that recitation by Lyle Menendez to his brother be the kind of thing that would trigger his fear hormones to respond?
Yes, because that did have more threats. I mean, threats were implied, and that is what would be a more important factor in terms of raising one's anxiety and fear level, yes.
All right. And in addition to that, the next factor is the fact that that same night, he claims that his father came to his room, came inside and physically assaulted him. Correct?
On that night,
Thursday night.
Thursday night, that is where he resists and is able to flee. That's the important part of that. His
And you-
behavior does change from just complying.
So at that point, he was aware of the fact that he could resist and be successful, correct?
Well, he now had an ally. He now had somebody he could go to, and that's who he does directly go to, someone that he does feel is going to protect him.
But his brother wasn't with him when his father came into the room, according to him, correct?
That's right.
And you would expect then that at that particular point in time, his fear response was in full alert, correct?
Well, yes, he does make flight.
And he goes to his brother, is that correct?
Yes.
You're aware of the fact that there is no indication that Mr. Menendez pursued him anywhere, correct?
Correct?
You're aware of the fact that there was a maid living in the house that night.
Well, I'm going to object, Your Honor, that has not been established.
Why don't you rephrase the question?
You're aware of the fact that are you aware of the fact that there were other people living in the house that night?
Objection, Your Honor, there's no evidence that there are other people.
I am not aware of any. I know that there was stated that there was a maid present who lived there, but I do not know whether she was there at that time.
Okay, well, are you aware of the testimony that Erik Menendez gave, the statement that Erik Menendez gave to the police on September the 17th of 1989 in Princeton, New Jersey?
Yes.
Okay, and are you aware during that statement there's discussion of the fact that the maid had Fridays through Sundays off?
Yes.
Okay. Have you read any reports from the maid as to her recollection of the week in question?
I don't believe so.
Now then, I believe you've indicated that the other event that was significant to you was the mother revealing her knowledge of the abuse and then blaming her sons, correct?
Correct.
Now, would that revelation by the mother trigger these hormones, this fear response?
Yes, that was a very important part of all of this because much of his behavior up until that point had been geared toward protecting and staying with the mother, etc. And here he now realizes that she has known, not only has known, but has taken no steps to protect him. And even then goes and blames her sons for the family's problems.
If that's true, then that's significant, correct?
If it's true that the family had problems?
No, if this
Oh.
fact is true that the mother actually said these things, then it's significant, correct?
Yes,
And the information you got in that regard is from Erik Menendez, correct?
that is correct.
Now, I believe you've indicated then that this was a cue sufficient to trigger the fear response. Is that
Yes.
correct?
The cumulative, those 5 factors.
Okay. Well, these 5 factors occurred over a period of several days, correct?
Correct.
Was he in a constant state of fear response during that period of time?
He was highly anxious. He had the hypervigilance. He was anxious. He was having difficulty sleeping. There are other facets of a aroused state.
Would difficulty in sleeping be consistent with someone who was planning to murder their parents?
I'm not aware of sleep patterns in that. I
You know,
don't think that. I mean, if somebody has a plan and is going to carry it out and is very calm and collected about it, I would think they'd be able to sleep very well.
You do?
If they had it all planned out. But again, I don't know any studies that have been looking at the sleeping patterns of people who plan.
Okay, so there are no psychological studies in existence right now mapping out the sleep patterns of premeditated murderers, correct?
Well, I think that the information or the research does show that they tend to be pretty calm, pretty collected, pretty organized.
So the only kind of premeditated murder there is someone who is cold-blooded, is that correct?
It generally means planning and organization. I know that that's a legal word, premeditation, but it generally means being able to have high thinking. You've got to have low emotion.
Okay, so if you're emotional, then you can't premeditate. Would that be your testimony?
Well, Your Honor, I think these questions are really improper from a legal standpoint.
Yes, the term premeditation is a legal term, and the court will define that for the jury at the appropriate time at the end of the trial, and this witness is not the source of such a definition. Your next question.
If you're emotional, then does that mean you can't plan?
It depends what you're planning.
Now, did you consider the incident that occurred on Saturday night as related to you by Erik Menendez with his father pounding at the door where Erik was armed with a gun?
Yes.
Okay. And you didn't put that into your factors here. This wasn't factor number 6. Is there a reason for that?
That was not one of the critical factors because the father didn't get in.
Okay. So you're telling me that when Erik Menendez relates that his father was pounding at the door and Erik Menendez had the shotgun and it was pointed at the door,
Mhm.
that wasn't significant?
Well, we can add it. I mean, it certainly was part of the total picture from Thursday on through Sunday. I mean, that is one additional aspect to it.
Now, if it were true that this event occurred on Saturday night where the father was pounding at the door and Erik Menendez was armed with a shotgun, wouldn't you expect his fear hormones to be in full stampede?
Well, this is getting pretty close to Sunday.
No, I'm talking about Saturday night. You've outlined these events that occurred starting with Tuesday when the mother pulled the hairpiece off her son.
That's right.
Okay, and you've talked about this buildup, correct?
That's correct.
You've talked about events up to Saturday, correct?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Didn't you consider it significant that this event occurred on Saturday night where his father was pounding at his door and he, for once, was armed with a shotgun which was loaded?
To protect himself. That's correct.
All right. Now, if in fact he was suffering from all this hypervigilance during the week, why
Yes.
didn't he shoot his father then?
Well, he thought about that, but the door is shut and the door is locked, and as long as the father doesn't come in, he also only had 2 shells, as I remember correctly.
But Dr. Burgess, you said that when a person goes into this automatic fear, biological, recoded genes response, that person acts automatically.
That's correct.
Okay. And if Erik Menendez was assaulted, or if Erik Menendez was in the situation he described on that Saturday night, he would have been in the full automatic fear response based upon your evaluation of him, wouldn't he?
Yes, and I said there's a cumulative effect so that you have to look at all of those days, and if you want to add that, we can make it a 6th point. Yes, that's a very important factor.
Wasn't his father?
So like what Pam is suggesting that if Erik was acting automatically, he would have shot his dad through the door, tried to shoot his dad through the door. Seems like there's a high likelihood of failure if he does that, and the consequences of that would be absolutely insane. I mean, just based on who Mr. Menendez was, who Jose Menendez was.
Father pounding on the door more threatening than his father closing the den door the next day?
Oh, no, because the word had already been told. He was supposed to go up to his room, and then the father would come up and see him there, and that's a more specific clue that of something that's going to happen, and that's really what generates the what happens on Sunday evening, later that evening.
You're saying that his father saying, go to your room, was more of a threat than his father standing at the door trying to pound the door down. You're saying that was more of a threat, the go to your room versus let me into your room?
Well, the door was locked. He had the gun.
Dr. Burgess,
Don't forget he had. No, I'm not going to.
We can perhaps counsel allow the witness to answer the question.
Yes, I think
Yeah.
that's your answer.
Yes, I think I have.
Your next question.
how do you explain this incident on Saturday night? How do you explain the fact that okay, let me back up.
Okay.
He would have been in the fear response because his father is pounding down the door,
I'm
correct?
going to object to the form of the question. I think the door was coming off the hinges just yet.
All right, overruled as to the form of the question.
Your Honor, I still have a ways to go. Shall we break for lunch?
No, let's keep going a little.
Okay. Okay. On Saturday night, according to Erik Menendez, he has gone out and bought a shotgun, and he's gone out and he's bought stronger ammunition, correct?
Correct.
Okay. He's got a loaded gun in his bedroom, which he secreted somewhere on his bed, correct?
Correct.
His father, who he allegedly believes to be a child molester, is pounding at the door,
All right,
correct?
I've got to object to the form of the question. It's argumentative.
All right, if you've got to, then you will. Is that right? All
No,
right.
I don't always.
All right,
like
the
it.
objection is sustained as to the form of the question. You may rephrase it. If you want to break it down so that you aren't summarizing evidence.
Okay. According to his testimony, he's in his room, correct?
And
That's
I'm gonna
correct.
Object to the form of the question based on testimony.
Overruled.
You read his testimony, didn't you?
Yes.
Did you see any of his testimony?
Yes, I did. I think I saw the cross exam.
Okay.
Yes.
Now, the events of Saturday night where he has a gun and his father is beating on the door, correct?
Yes.
We're talking about that event, correct?
Yes.
You've indicated that he's hypervigilant all week, correct?
Yes.
We know, according to what you've said, that on Thursday night, his father chased him in his own bedroom, correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay. And then on Saturday night, this incident occurs where the father pounds on the door
Yes.
and Erik Menendez is armed.
Yes.
Would you consider arming oneself with a loaded shotgun to be a stressful event?
Well, it's for self-protection, so that certainly is a stressful event, yes.
All right. Would you consider a father who you believe to be a child molester pounding on your bedroom door to be a stressful event?
Yes,
So he would have been under a lot of stress.
yes,
And even if none of the events of the week before had happened, that particular event would have been stressful, right?
yes. Oh,
Never mind.
sorry. Yes,
Is that correct?
yes, correct.
Is there any reason that he would not have been in this full fear response at that time?
No,
So he would have been.
yes,
Okay. And I believe it was your testimony that when one is in that particular response, one reacts automatically.
that's correct.
But you indicated that Erik Menendez would have known or would have thought about the fact that his gun only had 2 rounds and things of that nature, correct?
Well, he's sitting there with a gun and he knows it has 2 rounds, and he's actually thinking if his father comes in, he is going to have to
Right.
shoot, and will 2 rounds or 2 shells be adequate to protect himself?
So in spite of the fact that he's in this full fear response, it's your testimony that he would have had the capacity to think about the weapon available to him and whether or not it would kill.
Well, he has it, and he is sitting there as you describe. He is sitting there, and he is prepared to use it to defend himself if anything further happens with that door.
And if he's thinking about the number of rounds in his weapon, is he engaging in cognitive behavior?
Yes, he's sitting right there, and he's very focused in on one particular point, and that's to protect himself.
Now, the snails that you talked about who reacted to this impulse did not have cognitive behavior available to them, correct? Snails can't think.
That's correct.
All right. And I believe that the research that substantiates this neurobiological genetic recoding is based in part upon these snails.
That's one of these groups that they've studied. That's correct.
And I believe in your direct examination, you testified that the brainstem, which controls this kind of automatic behavior, is similar in humans as it is in snails.
Yes, this one particular area, correct.
And it was based upon that research that you hypothesized that Erik Menendez and others similarly situated would have this fear response, correct?
Yes,
Okay. Now, I believe you testified, did you not, in direct examination, that the fear response puts the individual on something akin to automatic pilot.
that's right. Yes.
Okay. Automatic pilot. Now, does that occur in the snail as well as the human?
You can't look at behavior in snails. Well, they avoid. They were studying the avoiding behavior. Remember, getting away from the dangerous stimuli.
So what you're testifying to now then is that even though he would have been in this full fear response with the adrenaline pumping and his hormones going,
Yes.
that he would have had the ability to think.
Well, the thinking is he's on automatic. If that his thought is if that door opens, he is going to shoot to protect himself. I see that as a automatic kind of one singular thought.
But he's not thinking. He's on automatic pilot.
Well, the thinking, we said it's high emotion, low thinking. It doesn't mean zero thinking. It
Thank
goes into a more
you.
automatic protective mode.
Thank you.
People do when they are threatened, still behave and still act as best they can, even though there's high emotion. I mean, we'll go back to that car. People do try to do things to avoid a car accident. They don't just stop thinking.
Thank you.
Why would the events of the father closing the door to the den on Sunday night be more provocative than the father pounding on the door on Saturday night?
Because it's more characteristic for this family to be silent, to give an order to shut the door, and that was an important factor added to what we've already talked about on these other factors.
But I think you testified that when things are not characteristic, that they create a heightened sense of hypervigilance. In other words, when things are not always as they seem, that causes stress to the individual who is subject to this phenomena you've described.
Yeah, well, they don't know what is going to be discussed within what is going to go on. All they have is the instructions to get up to your room and he will deal with him later.
Okay, so if the father has not previously pounded on the door, that would be something new that would cause additional stress, correct?
Well, that had already occurred and that had already heightened that whole phenomenon. That had just happened the night before.
Isn't one of the things you consider in this particular assessment, and one of the things you found significant, is that the behavior of the parents had changed, and that change in behavior caused extra stress?
Yes, that's the cumulative aspect. We've looked at this as Erik Menendez going into a more crisis kind of situation because there was new factors. All of these things that had occurred. And so there was call for new behavior.
But I think what you said was significant about closing the door on Sunday night was that it's something that had happened before. So which is it, Dr. Burgess? Is it something that happened before or the new experience, which is the greater stressor to the individual?
Objection.
Argumentative. Of course, it's
I
overruled.
believe that you never can get away from old cues as well as new cues. So you have to be able to factor in those. And so some of the old cues is the shutting the door, the being silent, et cetera. But the new cues is what we have just gone through in these 5 or 6 items. So that interfaces those all. It isn't like it's a brand new situation. You have special knowledge of a situation in which parents have behaved in a way before. That still is part of one's fund of knowledge.
Now, on the night in question, oh, by the way, I have another question. You're familiar with the fact that Erik Menendez, when he moved out of the family home and got his own place, took his bed with him?
Yes.
Did you
I am.
consider that significant in light of the fact that he claims that is the bed where his father sexually abused him?
My understanding is he did put additional factors on. This was a bed that where the sexual abuse occurred. There were corners and sharp corners and so forth. And so he changed the bed, if you will, with those, I guess, bumpers that were bought. And this was, and I'm aware of that this was now a different, if you will, it had been changed.
Because of the presence of bumpers.
Well, there were sharp edges. I don't understand. I have not seen the bed, but that's my understanding of the testimony.
Do you see anything inconsistent with a child abuse victim taking the bed, which is the scene of the crime, with him to a place of safety as a memento? Do you find that at all inconsistent?
It's not a memento. Maybe it's just a thing of comfort. It's what comfort, a lot of discomfort, obviously, but like if it's the thing that you're used to, like it's the thing that you grew up with, it's like a space that you are very, very familiar with. When you are moving out of your family home, it can be a huge source of comfort in a way. This is why, like, when people don't leave their abusers, because there's a certain level of comfort in the experience of living how they've been living. It's having that change can be very uncomfortable, even though it's objectively by all measures better. So it's like, I don't know. I'm not buying this point right here.
Your Honor, I'm going to object to the form of the question since it's got many facts not in evidence.
Furniture had to be taken to set up a new place. I don't see that necessarily inconsistent.
Are you
As I
aware,
said, there's been change made to it.
are you aware of the testimony of Erik Menendez's Aunt Marta, that she went shopping with him for furniture? And in fact, one of the things he bought was a pool table, correct?
I believe so.
And those were expensive items of furniture, correct?
That is correct.
And so it wasn't for lack of funds that he took the bed with him, correct?
Well, it could have been to conserve money. I have no idea. I did not talk to him about why he took certain items with him.
Do you think it's more important to have a pool table or a bed to sleep in?
Your Honor, I'm going to object.
Yeah, that's a dumbass question.
So you didn't see anything unusual about the fact that Erik Menendez took this bed with him when he moved out, correct? You didn't see that as unusual?
Objection asked
Not
and answered.
necessarily, no.
Shall I continue?
No.
All right, does the court wish me to finish before we go to lunch? Okay, I shall continue.
She really wants that lunch. She wants that lunch. Get it, Pam. Get that lunch. But this is a good question here, Tish. Do you think Pam actually was thinking about having lunch on time, or is she asking for lunch because she has to do something like rethinking, fixing her papers or something? I think she is stuck in the weeds and she wants to try to take a step back for a minute and figure out how to try to put this together. She's frustrated, I think, is what's happening here. That's why she keeps asking for it. She's asked for it at least 3 times at this point. Let me also get some other questions here while we're paused because there are some that have been waiting for a while. Flash Fan 85, did you hear that Scott Peterson has a hearing tomorrow to see about a new trial? Yes, I did. I did hear about that. I'm gonna be paying attention to that for sure. Mads Bazoo, sorry, but I've got one more related to this trial. Isn't prosecution's job to deliver justice? In this case, it was obvious that the brothers were victims too. Has prosecution ever dropped / reduced charges due to such reasons? I mean, I'm sure it's happened. I'm sure it's happened. Not every DA, not every prosecutor is, you know, obsessed with a very specific result. There are those that exist, of course, but not everyone is. If they encounter some sort of evidence that really calls into question the charges, I'm sure without a doubt that there are those who, sorry, not an earthquake, that was Mavi jumping. I'm certain that there are prosecutors out there who would and have dropped charges or modified charges as a result. AB short clips. Alita, are there any cases you know of where it was proven someone created an elaborate story as Erik and Lyle have been accused of? I just find that to be to be wild. Too many terrible memories to just make up. I mean, we have seen cases where people have made things up, and when tested on cross examination, and then when put up against other circumstantial evidence, things just look more and more ridiculous, right? Like that's why it's not because of bots. That's why Amber Heard was trolled up by social media, right? I know that there was a whole podcast that recently came out about like who trolled Amber Heard, and it's like all about how like Russian bots or something are to blame for it or something along those lines. But realistically, if you watched the trial, you know that as the more she talked, and it was a very elaborate story. It involved a Maker's Mark bottle. It involved all kinds of different things. It got incredibly detailed. But the more you sort of peeled back those layers, the more you realize this really is not adding up. And that includes her own behavior on the panel. It didn't not on the panel, but on the witness stand, it just did not seem to fit. And along with the other statements that were recorded, other text messages, there's just so much there. So that's the first thing that comes to mind. I am sure that there are people who have also made up incredibly elaborate stories. The thing is that, usually the more elaborate they are, the more there is to pull on a thread, right? Like they're to, and see if that sweater starts to unravel. Like each detail is a thread to pull on, in other words. So yeah, I'm certain of it. Um, Also, there were some questions about this witness. Nicole Lechner, is this their teacher? Ingrid Fitz, this witness is a therapist, correct? So she's not. I don't think she's a therapist, but she's got a doctorate in like some kind of like nursing psychology, something or other. Um, and she is also a professor, and she's got if you go back to part 1, I know that I have her credentials in the description box, but I didn't manage to copy and paste them over here. But she has a ton of experience and a ton of credentials to be able to talk about all of this stuff. Ingrid Fitz, did she report this to Child Protective Services? I don't remember if they did back then. So she, meaning Kitty, I think you mean? No, I mean, regardless of who we're talking about, no one reported any of this to Child Protective Services. The only time that this information came out was after the killings, after the shootings, because they um this was a closely guarded family secret, according to the defense, according to Erik and Lyle, right? If you are pro prosecution in this case, you think it's all a crock of shit and that they made it up to try to get out of the death penalty for murder. But yeah, no, there was no reporting any of this to Child Protective Services for a number of reasons, according to the defense. Tish, is Pam scoring any points? Is she getting anywhere with this witness in your opinion? I mean, the points of the, the premeditation loop that I talked about earlier, that's kind of a catch-22. That's one that I'm a little uneasy about what she's testified to here. I would like to see some nuance kind of injected into that, so that we can understand how you can have someone who is successfully charged for premeditated murder, because if they've been caught, she was saying that, if someone's been caught, they didn't have a plan. And so if they didn't have a plan, it roughly means that it wasn't premeditated. So that means that you basically can't have someone be successfully charged and convicted for premeditated murder because they've been caught. And so therefore, even if they had a plan, maybe the plan failed, but then it's a little cyclical. So like I said, I'd like to see some nuance on that. Otherwise, there is some shakiness to her testimony. Other than that, though, n- it's yeah, it's a long cross examination. Most of it is discardable in my opinion. Shireen, not convinced. So how could Pam say, not convicted. So how could Pam say incarcerated for murder? So they were still being jailed though. So incarcerated technically could mean that you're confined, you're behind bars, you're not allowed to go anywhere. So um technically that's what she said. I would have objected to the use of that language because it sounds prejudicial, but I don't know if this judge would have sustained it. Uh, Also, Tish, in totality, what does Pam want the jury to think about the essay? I feel like she's argued conflicting points. She wants to completely discredit it. She wants them to think that they absolutely are lying about it, that they made it up, that they would go so far as to claim this to get out of murder. Alrighty, let's get back to it.
Now, Dr. Burgess, if Erik Menendez and his brother could not have gone to the movie theater and could not have purchased the tickets the way they said and buried the guns and changed their clothes and gone to Santa Monica Civic in the period of time available, would that change your opinion about the truthfulness of the information you've received from Erik Menendez?
No,
It would not?
no, the time between, is this the time? Repeat the question. Is it the time? Yeah, I thought we,
Between 10 p.m. and 11:07 are the
yes,
times that are critical to post-crime activity, correct?
yes, correct.
If all of the things that the Menendez brothers said they did could not be achieved in that period of time, would it
Right.
change your opinion as to the truthfulness of the information given to you by Erik Menendez?
I think I've said that is one of the factors I looked at in terms of what you're calling their activity, their post-crime activity. If that just didn't work.
What didn't
The
work?
time element, well, the going to the movie, the meeting of the friend, the trying to go to a second place. I think there are two places that they went to. That didn't happen, and then they come back.
What do you mean?
What do you mean by your question?
Yeah,
I don't understand her answer. Okay, are
I
you
didn't
I don't think
understand.
anyone understands your
All right.
Why
question,
don't you
Pam.
rephrase it then?
You heard or you read the testimony of Erik Menendez and his brother that after this crime that they committed out of fear,
Yes,
that they went and picked up the shells, correct?
correct.
And that took a period of time, correct?
I assume. Nobody's given me how long it took, but I
Well-
assume it took time.
And you're aware of the fact that they waited for a period of time before they picked up the shells, correct?
Yes, I am aware of that.
And you're aware of the fact, now, I believe you testified in your crime scene evaluation that there would have been blood on the perpetrators, correct?
One would suspect that given the amount of blood that was present. Yes,
And have you looked at the blood splatter evidence at the crime scene as well?
yes.
Okay, and would the head wound to Jose Menendez have caused splatter on the person who inflicted that wound?
Your Honor, I'm going to object at this point. There really hasn't been a recommendation for her expertise in blood splatter.
All right, well, she has certainly used that as a basis of her opinion and part of it, so objection overruled. Objection overruled.
You understand there are people, Dr. Burgess, who are experts in blood splatter, correct?
Yes,
And you are not one of those.
that's correct.
But regardless of where the drops went and what direction they went, would you assume that someone who inflicted the wound to the back of Mr. Menendez's head would have gotten blood on them?
Objection, that is not regardless of where it goes, but depending on that expertise, which is not an expert.
Well, she has certainly described the presence or absence of splatters as a factor she considered in this subject of planning. So objection overruled. Objection overruled.
What I would say is I'm not sure where and what wound would have given what blood splatter, but generally that much blood present at the scene would suggest that there's going to be some blood obtained on person's clothing, shoes, etc.
And you're aware of the testimony that in fact, each of the defendants changed at least an article of clothing after the killings. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And that changing the article of clothing took a period of time to accomplish.
Yes,
You're aware of the fact that they indicated that they went to the movie theater first in order to obtain tickets to substantiate where they were.
I'm aware they went to the movie theater yes, they went to the movie theater. I'm not sure to obtain tickets.
Well,
Yes.
did you read the testimony?
Yes, that's right. They went to the movie theater.
And you're familiar with the fact that Lyle Menendez said they parked at parking meters outside of Century City, correct?
Yes,
All right. Now, you're aware of the fact that after they got the tickets, they went up to an area at Mulholland and Coldwater, and they got rid of the guns.
yes, I'm familiar with that testimony.
And you're aware of the fact that it would take a period of time to secrete the guns the way it was described by the defendants.
Objection, I call for speculation.
Sustained.
You're aware of the fact that getting rid of guns would take a period of time.
Yes, yes,
And you're aware of the fact that they then returned into the Beverly Hills area and proceeded to the Santa Monica Civic.
yes, I am.
And you're aware of the fact that at least one of the brothers indicates that they changed their clothes beforehand.
Yes,
Okay. Now, if one had blood on them and one were going to meet someone like Perry Berman, you wouldn't want to have blood on your clothes when you met Perry Berman, correct?
Sustained.
Would a careful person who was trying to perfect an alibi show up at a place to be identified with blood on his clothes?
Sustained.
So you're aware of the fact that they went to Santa Monica, is that correct?
yes, I am.
Did you ever think to yourself, gee, I wonder if they could have done that in an hour and 7 minutes?
Overruled.
Did you ever think to yourself,
I did not look at the time it would take to drive all that places, and I didn't see any documentation of how long the houses are away from these sites that they went to. I
Did you ever-
don't have that.
did you ever ask anyone to see if it was possible before you decided that Erik Menendez was telling the truth?
Well, sometimes it's included in a police report, that kind of information, or testified to a grand jury or something.
Well, another factor is what time they did it. This was all at night, right? This was at like 8 or 9 p.m. That's past rush hour. You can get to a lot of places faster in LA around 8 or 9 p.m. than 7 p.m., even 6 p.m., 5 p.m. for sure. I mean, you're not getting anywhere fast in LA around then. But 8 or 9 p.m., you can get to a lot of places around the West Side.
I just did not find that material.
Did you ever ask anyone to provide you with that information so you could assess whether or not Erik Menendez was telling the truth?
Telling the truth? No, I did not ask anyone for that information.
Now, it's your testimony that this crime was a result of fear, correct?
That's correct.
And are you familiar with the testimony of Lyle Menendez that he acted out of fear as well?
Yes, I am.
And I take it you don't find any inconsistency in the fact that although the brothers had different experiences growing up, they both were in this fear response. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Now, when they went in and they picked up the shells, when they went out and they reloaded the gun, when Lyle went out to reload the gun,
Yes.
was he in that fear response when he reloaded?
He was in a state of high emotion, yes.
Well, is there?
Well, fear, all right, yes, fear response.
Was he having this biological phenomena that you described that happens in these snails, in your opinion?
Overruled.
he is in a highly anxious state and a fearful state. Yes.
Okay, well, okay, for purposes of this discussion that we're going to have now, how do you describe this response where someone is acting on automatic pilot?
Right. The
What do
way
you
I-
call it? What shall we call it?
Well, it's an automatic response. And the point here is there's such high emotion that was not a needed behavior. That was not necessary. If that had been a very planned, if this had had a plan and had been very, as we call, organized, that would not have had to happen.
But did you talk to Dr. Oziel about the snails ever? Maybe let's put these two loops in together and see if maybe we get something new. I'm sorry. I'm getting frustrated by these loops. I feel like I'm in a time loop.
But do you remember the testimony of Lyle Menendez that his mother was still sneaking around the room even after she'd been shot?
Rephrase the question.
Do you remember the testimony of Lyle Menendez that he saw his mother sneaking around the coffee table?
Rephrase the question.
Do you remember the testimony of Lyle Menendez in which he described his mother's behavior as being sneaky? Remember that testimony?
Not as sneaky, no.
You don't
I
remember?
remember a noise, but I don't remember sneaky.
Now you say that last shot was not necessary.
Correct.
Okay. You're familiar with the fact that Lyle Menendez indicates he only reloaded one shot of birdshot, correct?
Correct.
You're familiar with the coroner's report that there were two separate birdshot wounds to Mrs. Menendez.
Yes.
Okay. How do you reconcile that with his testimony that he only reloaded once?
Well, again, this is the mixed ammunition that's found at the crime scene, and that really doesn't tell us whose gun had what shells in it, and really speaks to, I believe, to more emotionality in terms of loading the gun and doing that. I don't think we can tell who had what shot.
When the brothers went out to the car to reload before the shooting began, were they on automatic pilot?
Overall.
Yes.
They were on automatic.
Well, they were on a, yes, they were in a fear mode. Yes.
All right. And when they were in this fear mode, they were able to think, gee, I better get these 2 rounds of birdshot out of here and put in these rounds of buckshot so I can do a better job. Is that what was going on?
No, that's not what I think is going on.
How can behavior such as loading and unloading a shotgun be automatic to someone who's not done it before?
Because, well, they had done it to load first. I mean, it's not like they had never done it. They had to load the guns first. So I don't see that as not knowing how to load a gun.
So
It's
the
not
fact
that
that
hard.
they loaded the shotgun on one prior occasion meant that this particular behavior was automatic for them. Is that correct?
Well, what becomes automatic is the high emotion and the misunderstanding what the situation is. They had not planned it to know that they didn't need to do all of this to, if indeed it was a plan, as you suggest, to do that. They didn't need to do all of that.
But this is Monday morning quarterbacking, isn't it? For you to sit here and say what they should have done.
No,
years
this is looking
ago?
at crime scene.
Overall.
No, this is what is called crime scene, looking at the crime scene. I don't think you need to get into Monday at this particular time to read that crime scene for the preliminary crime scene in terms of the number of weapons, the number of injuries, et cetera.
Did you consider the possibility that the crime did not occur the way that the defendants thought it would?
I considered all kinds of things when I listened to all the material, and I sifted and sorted and looked at as many things as I possibly could. I did not go in with one particular point of view.
And then they were on automatic pilot after they loaded their guns and went back into the room, correct?
Oh,
Yes, as to
Yes.
which
I'm
reloading
sorry.
you're talking
I'm
about.
talking about the reloading that occurred prior to the shootings, not after the shootings. They were on automatic pilot when they went back in. Is that correct?
when they went back in the second time.
Yes.
Ye-
No, I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Why don't you rephrase the question as to the incident where the guns were reloaded first or second?
Also really quick, there is a question here. Cat Love Turning Peach. Is it appropriate for the judge to keep saying rephrase the question? So I paused it here. Like he's a professor in a class seems too biased to me. I know his tone for a lot of folks in the chat, his tone often suggests them bias, and also, whether he overrules or sustains certain objections. Um, yeah, I mean, I totally understand what you guys mean by that. When he's saying rephrase a question, honestly, I think a lot of his tone is also just impatience. Where that impatience comes from, is it bias? Is there bias within it as well? I'm not sure, but I think, jury's going to be making impressions of that too. I don't know if they end up judging it or if they end up, judging the people that he's talking to, because usually the judge is the most neutral person that the jury like automatically is like, you are the authority figure. I'm going to listen to what you say. They tend to um rely more quickly on like the judge for that reason. But this one, I don't know if that's a little bit different for the jury in this experience because of, his tone at times. I don't know. It'd be interesting to find that out. I know that there have been a number of them who have written books from the experience.
When the defendants loaded their guns with buckshot and went into the room to kill their parents, I take it as your testimony that they were on automatic pilot.
Yes.
And when they left that room and returned to the car in order to reload with birdshot, they were on automatic pilot.
Rephrase the question.
When Erik Menendez and his brother went to the car and Erik handed his brother around a birdshot,
Yes.
they were both on automatic pilot. Is that correct?
Yes.
And when they returned to the room and Lyle Menendez put the muzzle of the gun up against his mother's cheek, they were still on automatic pilot. Is that correct?
Objection overruled.
Yeah.
Objection overruled.
My understanding of the coroner's report is that you cannot determine exactly where a gun is necessarily having a particular point, that you couldn't determine that from the crime scene.
Do you know
It's
what
ha-
a contact wound is, Dr. Burgess?
Yes, I do.
A contact wound is when the muzzle of the gun is placed on the skin, correct?
Near.
Rephrase the question.
Okay, Dr. Burgess, what is a contact wound?
My understanding of a contact wound is that the gun muzzle is placed very close to a particular part.
Are you familiar with the coroner's testimony in this case, as well as the coroner's report, wherein, as to Mr. Menendez's contact wound on the back of his head, there was actually a muzzle impression? Are you familiar with that testimony?
Yes.
Okay, so that would have been a contact wound where the gun was actually touching the skin.
Yes.
And are you familiar with the coroner's testimony, as well as his report, that there was no soot or stippling on the outside of the wound on Mrs. Menendez's left cheek?
That's correct.
Okay, and the absence of soot or stippling would indicate that the muzzle of the gun was on the cheek, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Well, it also goes beyond this witness's
Yeah.
expertise. Objection sustained.
Well, all right, but you just testified as to what you think a contact wound is, correct?
Overruled.
Yeah, that was my, and again, I'm not an expert in gunshot wounds.
Now, if it's been established through the testimony of the coroner and also through the testimony of Lyle Menendez that he went back in and put the muzzle up against his mother's cheek and pulled the trigger, was he on automatic pilot when he did that?
Objection misstates the testimony.
Overruled.
Was he on automatic pilot when he did that?
He's on automatic pilot when he's doing what he's doing. There's high emotionality, low thinking.
And when he and his brother went back into the room to pick up the shells, they were still on automatic pilot?
Well, now that gets into another phase, and I think we've already talked about that. That's what the post-crime behavior is. And there is a segment of time that you now need to get, I think, needs to come in terms of afterwards, in the foyer, all of that, and waiting for the police to come. That's an important piece.
Do you find it at all interesting that if in fact these two brothers were acting out of fear, that they had the presence of mind within 5 to 10 minutes of doing this crime to go back in their room and pick up shotgun shells to eliminate fingerprints?
Well, I think that is part of what happens as they're sitting in the foyer to try. It's a whole nother phase. They did not anticipate having to plan that or to do to use or to what to do afterwards, because they fully expected that the police would show. That the noise and all of that, that had not in any way been part of their thinking. Now they are faced with having to do something, and they are faced with what they did. And so the behavior now becomes focused on a different aspect.
At which point in the sequence did the automatic pilot fear response turn off?
Well, there's still I mean, it doesn't just go on and off like a switch. There certainly is a length of time, and that's certainly what all the studies have shown. So that's not that they're actually still on or still off, but they're in a highly aroused state in terms of fear.
I don't know about you, but when I am having an adrenaline rush, I can just shut it off right afterwards and be like calm as a cucumber. Right? Like that just it makes sense. It takes a while for the adrenaline to calm, for you to like come back to an equilibrium. That just makes sense.
Do you find it at all significant that they had the presence of mind when acting in this fear response to go back and to think of, oh gee, their fingerprints on those shells, we better go get them? Did you find that at all unusual?
No.
Why not?
Because there can be another explanation for it. They were now thinking of what had happened, and to remove that is another action.
There's another explanation for it as well, isn't there, Dr. Burgess?
Overall.
The other explanation is that they planned before the crime to pick up the shells.
Well, that is your theory. That's not what I think. I read the crime scene, and I think there's far more information that follows that confirms their lack of planning and their intent to protect themselves.
All right,
Okay.
let's take our recess here and we'll resume at 1:30. Don't discuss this. matter
Pam
with any-
finally gets her lunch. One second before we get started on the next section. The post-lunch portion of Pam's cross-examination, maybe she'll have a different performance now that she's hopefully not hangry. Cat Love Dreaming Peach, why does he keep overruling Leslie so much? I just want to jump in and fix it. Well, keep in mind that Leslie also is very adept at trial theater. So there are at least some of these objections here that she's making that are for the theater, that are for, interrupting the pattern, that are for injecting her side's narrative in front of the jury. So there is a little bit of that coming in as well. So there, not every single one of her objections is one that should be sustained. Let's see here. Also, Debbie Faison Cook, is this just Eric's jury? Is that why Lyle isn't there? Exactly. This is just in front of Eric's jury. Cat Love Dreaming Peach, have things changed? Are lawyers allowed to be so openly contemptuous? Well, we definitely saw that in the Hannah Gutierrez Reed trial, right? We saw quite a bit of contemptuousness from the special prosecutor there, both against witnesses and also against opposing counsel. So it depends. It goes from judge to judge, courtroom to courtroom. It can also depend on like which part of the country you're in. I mean, generally speaking, in California, from what I've seen anyway, people tend to be less contemptuous or less overtly aggressive. I mean, not to say that it doesn't happen in trials, but my experience in litigation, at least, is the interpersonal contact tends to be a bit more chill in California than it is on the East Coast, for the most part. Not to say that I haven't had some conversations in pretrial litigation where opposing counsel was a total jerk and had absolutely no need to be. But I don't know. There's just I think that there tends to be more of a detachment from the aggression, and you're just like, we're just here for the facts, man. Um, so yeah, not 100% of the time, but I would say more often than not, that's the way things are in California. But obviously this case is also in California. It's a different time. Maybe that explains it, or maybe it's just the DA's office at that particular time. All right. Okay. Let's see post lunch Pam.
All right, you may continue your cross-examination.
Dr. Burgess, did you ever discuss Dr. Oziel's notes with Erik Menendez?
No, I did not.
In your review of Dr. Oziel's notes, did you ever see any reference to the term sociopath?
Objection, Your Honor, ask for vote.
Overruled.
Why are we back to Dr. Oziel? Why do we keep coming back to him? This is frustrating.
I believe there was a reference to that, yes.
Do you know what
I
a
would ask to approach, Your Honor, for some notion of what counsel is asking about.
Well, you're going to refer to the testimony?
that was a preparatory question. I just have a couple questions in
All
this
right,
area.
there's no need.
Do you? Really? I don't believe that at this point.
Did you ever consider the possibility that Erik Menendez was a sociopath?
I considered all possibilities, looking at all of the data and reviewing everything. So within that framework, I would have to say I considered everything, but I ruled certain things out.
What is your understanding of what a sociopath is?
Your Honor, I'm going to object. There's no foundation.
Sustained.
I believe you've indicated that one of the that there are two responses to this automatic fear response. One is flight and one is fight.
Yes.
Correct?
And there's freeze.
Oh, there's a third one?
Well, there's the numbing, the third.
Yeah, she's already talked
freezing,
about
the
that.
numbing. The three parts, preparatory, and the fight, flight, and then it goes into the third phase of the numbing, freezing.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm talking about the second phase.
Pam, were you not listening? Come on.
Okay, fight,
Okay.
flight, yes.
The second phase is fight or flee.
Well, don't forget, sometimes you can do neither.
All right. Now, on Thursday night of the week in question, which was the 17th of August of 1989, you've related an incident in which Erik Menendez was able to flee from his father, correct?
Yes,
And that would be an example of the fear response kicking in, and he chose flight and, in fact, was successful at it.
yes,
On Saturday night, when his father was pounding at the door and he was armed with a shotgun,
yes.
he couldn't flee because he was in a locked room, correct?
That's correct.
But he didn't fight.
That's correct.
He was poised
Was
to
that
fight,
a
though.
conscious choice on his part, or was that an automatic response?
That's actually a good example of freezing because he did have a choice of shooting.
Okay, so even though he was in this automatic mode, he still had choice available.
Yes.
So does that mean we're not like snails in that regard?
I really don't think we can make any analogy to snails. Snails is one example of the genetic recoding. So I'm not prepared to talk about what making the analogy to snails when we're talking about human behavior.
Dr. Burgess, you brought up in your direct examination the research on the snails, which
Yes,
was used in order to substantiate this genetic recoding, correct?
I just said that's one of the studies that they have done that's looking at the genetic recoding.
And one of the things that goes on in that genetic recoding is that the mechanism for triggering the hormones is either shortened or hypersensitized or something like that,
No,
right?
it recodes and it has a new translation and it recodes in terms of survival. So there now is a higher level, and that's the higher Q reading for the survival mode.
And on Saturday night, when Erik Menendez's father was pounding at the door and he was armed with a loaded shotgun, he would have been in this mode where his fear hormones were triggered, correct?
That's correct.
And he did not fight.
He did not fight. He did not flee. He froze.
He couldn't flee because he was in a locked room
Yes.
and he was on the second story of a building.
Well,
Correct.
he could have gotten up and unlocked the door.
And that would have been a fight response.
Well, that would be one example, yes. Or he could have shot.
And that would be a fight response.
Yes.
And the flight response wouldn't be reasonable because he was in a locked room and the only avenue of safe escape was through past his father who was pounding on the door, correct?
Yes.
Now on Sunday, then, he chose, in your interpretation, the fight response.
Yes.
Can you explain why on Thursday and Saturday he didn't choose the fight response, but on Sunday he did?
Well, there is
Because he
that
had Lyle with him.
interaction that has occurred just before the parents go in, and that's been testified to, I believe, by both defendants. And that's where there is the exchange. The brothers are told they're not to leave, and that Erik is told to go to his room, and then the parents go into the family room. So there is, what I'm saying is there's another added piece to this 5 steps have occurred before that.
Now, I believe we discussed earlier the fact that the cue of closing the door and going into the den is something that you believe was a triggering cue. Would that be fair to say?
Well, that's an old cue.
Well, how is that an old?
prior.
Okay,
The
how is that?
silence, the not just giving the order, dismissing the persons and leaving the room.
On prior occasions when that particular cue had been given, had Erik Menendez's life been in danger?
Well, that's a cue that is into a wider type of situation now, where many examples have been given about how Jose Menendez would stop a conversation with just a mere cut of his hand or use of his hand or a look.
Stopping a conversation is not a life-threatening act, is it?
I was just giving you some examples.
Okay, but my question is this. Is there any evidence that on prior occasions when a door had been closed in the same manner in which it was on Sunday night, that Erik Menendez's life had been in danger?
Well, what is important about the 4 or 5 days that we're talking about is that there's a direct threat. The incest secret is about to come out as perceived by that confrontation. So things are quite different. And I think you have to look at that type of material within the new context.
According to the testimony, the incest secret was revealed on Thursday night, correct?
That's correct.
And that would have greatly increased Erik Menendez's anxiety, correct?
That is correct.
And then Saturday night, the father is pounding at the door, correct?
Yes, there's also the fishing trip before that.
Oh, the fishing trip. Did you find any significance in the fishing trip?
Yes, I think the fishing trip did have significance in terms of the time change without very adequate kind of explanation. They were just told, and in fact, they did try to avoid that by coming home late. There is testimony that shows that the family was about an hour and a half late, supposed to be there, I think, at 3, and they weren't there until 4:30. So that the parents waited for their sons was a factor.
The fact that the parents waited for their sons to go on a family outing, you found to be suspicious?
Yes, because the sons did not want to go and they were trying to come in late so that they wouldn't have to go.
But the parents didn't know the sons didn't want to go on the fishing trip. So how does their waiting for their sons, how does that trigger the sons that something's wrong?
Well, I think it's a good example of no communication. I mean, nobody's talking to each other. That's another important feature of this family at this particular point in time.
Okay, now the fact that the mother told them on Friday night that there's been a change in the time that we're going on the fishing trip, that has psychological significance in this chain of events, correct?
Yes, it has meaning in this, yes, in this chain of events.
And what is the meaning of that?
Well, the meaning of this is that she just gives this fact that it's going to be a change in time with minimal explanation, if any, and no questions are asked, nothing, and the sons are just supposed to show up at 3 o'clock on Saturday. And they haven't been told a lot of information about this shark fishing trip. And they're wondering if that might be a time when something dangerous is going to happen. They are geared for something dangerous to happen because there has been this confrontation between the father and the son.
I think the fact that they were going to fish for sharks was a cue to them to be in danger.
Well, I think the fact is that they were all going to be together and they didn't know when and what. The father was not known for revealing what he intended to do. That was a characteristic of the father.
Well, on Thursday night, Erik Menendez had fled. On Saturday night, Erik Menendez chose not to fight. They didn't have to go on the fishing trip, did they?
They didn't have to go.
And all they had to do was
They intended not to go.
All they had to do is drive around the block and wait for their parents to leave, and then they wouldn't have gone on the fishing trip, correct?
They
Correct?
waited an hour and a half before they came home so that they wouldn't have to go.
And you found it very ominous that the parents waited for them to go on a family outing.
I don't believe I said that.
Well, what psychological significance did you attach to the fact that the parents waited for them to go on a family outing?
We rejected the characterization. We testified this was a family outing.
What I found significant is that there was a whole lack of communication about this, that the parents did wait for the sons. This was supposed to be, as I understood it from the testimony from the captain, that the father was to learn this shark fishing for a client. So it was not necessarily in the context of that the family had to all be there. He could have learned this without the sons being there.
Is there anything that happened between Tuesday, the 15th, and Sunday, the 20th, which is inconsistent with your theory, which you consider to be inconsistent with your theory that this is a crime born out of fear?
No, this is my opinion. This is a crime born out of fear.
And there's no fact that you have considered and found to be in conflict with your theory about the fear?
Well, I think what we are not looking at is there still is a lot more material that also leads me to this conclusion that I think is very important to look at.
Now, when the brothers went to the car and they ejected the shells they previously put in the birdshot and they loaded with buckshot, I believe before lunch we discussed that that was an automatic response, correct?
Yes.
Now, have you ever done any studies of police shootings?
I've read studies of police shootings. I have not personally done any.
Police officers are trained in handling their weapons, correct?
That is correct.
Police officers are trained to reload.
Yes.
Police officers are trained more than just loading their weapon one time before they're sent out to use it, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
So a police officer's training would be greater than what the defendants claim they did in regard to the shotguns they purchased on Friday, correct?
Right. Yes.
You're aware of the fact that in stressful situations, police officers don't always respond to their training in regards to handling their firearms, correct?
That's the more high emotion and low thinking that can always happen in any situation.
That also doesn't necessarily mean that because the brothers had less training, that therefore they were completely incapable of reloading. Like if they had loaded it once before, they knew how to load it. And it successfully fired, right? If they loaded it once before, it successfully fired, they knew how to load it. So then I don't understand why Pam is hammering so hard on this. I don't think she's going to get what she's trying to get from this witness.
And so I would take it that in spite of all the planning that the police officer does and how to handle his gun and how to reload, that the stress of the situation can make the best plan go awry.
That's training. Training is something that you're automatically are able to put your behavior into action around a specific event, whether that is loading your gun and shooting, or you could use other examples. I mean, training is to make that come automatic to you.
You have no evidence that either Erik Menendez or Lyle Menendez were trained in the use of a shotgun, correct?
That's correct.
But although they had no training, it's your testimony that when they loaded the gun from birdshot to buckshot, that was an automatic response.
That is correct.
Now, you're aware of the fact that loading the shotgun with 3 rounds is different from loading the shotgun with 6 rounds. Are you familiar with the testimony of Deputy Van Horn from the Sheriff's Department in this trial?
I thought it was 5 rounds, but yes.
No, it's 6.
It's
According to
6
the testimony of Mr. Van Horn, it was 6 rounds.
Yes, what it
Yeah.
means, how many can be fit into the weapon, or
Yes.
what do you mean?
You're familiar with the
Sorry about the court volume, guys. I can't boost it anymore because it's not YouTube, so I don't have the booster that I do for YouTube. And this installment, for whatever reason, the audio is just that much quieter. So you just have to boost up your own volume on your device. I'm really, really sorry about that. That there's nothing else that I can do. The next episode will be, well, we're gonna have like the tail end of this this episode will continue on into the next one, but beyond that, the next episode will be back to a normal volume. So I'm really sorry about that, guys. I know it's frustrating.
fact that according to the testimony of the defendants, they only loaded 2 rounds into their shotguns after they purchased them in San Diego on Friday night.
Correct.
And those rounds were birdshot.
Correct.
And you're aware that there's a mechanism necessary to eject already loaded rounds from the gun if you don't fire them out the barrel, correct?
Yes.
And you have no indication that these defendants had any training in doing that particular function, that is unloading the gun.
That's correct.
And you had no information that they had any training in fully loading the gun with 6 rounds.
Overall,
I don't have any information on, I mean, I have no knowledge that they had that training.
In examining the crime scene, did you ever count up the number of shots that you think were fired?
Well, I read the coroner's report and I read the police reports. I was not personally at the crime scene. So
But-
I only have that information to go on.
If you were not personally at the crime scene, how can
Mhm.
you testify that the crime scene was disorganized?
Be-
Objection, Your Honor, this has been asked against and gone over.
Right, the objection is sustained.
Dr. Burgess, you don't need to be at the crime scene in order to look at photographs of it, correct?
Objection argumentative.
Rephrase the question.
Dr. Burgess, did you make any attempt to count the number of shots that were fired from the photographs that you were given and the coroner's report and the coroner's
Your
testimony?
Honor, I would object, Mr. Chief. No
Counsel, what
foundation,
is,
no foundation for expert opinion by this witness on that.
all right, objection sustained.
Do you have any expertise in examining gunshot wounds?
No,
Is that something that is not included in your crime scene analysis?
that is part of the forensic report that comes in.
You understand that the coroner testified and also substantiated in his report that Mrs. Menendez had 10 areas of gunshot wounds.
10 areas, right, and he could not determine how many shots had been fired.
That's correct, but she had 10 areas, and some of those areas contain more than one wound to her body, correct?
Yes,
For instance, the one that went across her right forearm and into her right upper arm was considered one area of wounding for purposes of his discussion, correct?
yes,
You're aware of the fact that there were 2 misses in the doors, correct?
that's correct.
You're aware of the fact that Mr. Menendez had 5 areas of gunshot wound.
Yes,
Are you familiar with the trajectory of the various wounds on Mr. Menendez?
Well, Your Honor, I have to object. You gotta stand here.
Overall,
You know what trajectory is, don't you?
yes,
That's the direction that the bullet or shotgun pellets travel.
that's correct.
Now, did you at any time try to evaluate how many wounds you thought and how many, how many shots you thought were fired from looking at the crime scene?
No, I took what was written in the reports.
All
I
right,
did
and
not count per se. I looked at the autopsy report, looked at the coroner's report, looked at the police reports.
well, you know the number of rounds fired is an issue in this case, correct?
That's
I'm gonna
correct.
object, Your Honor, as a topic.
Overall.
Not expertise.
overall,
And in spite of the fact that you are not trained as an expert in gunshot wounds, you have studied crime scenes for a number of years, correct?
Yes,
Did you ever make an attempt to evaluate using your own prior experience how many gunshots you thought had been fired?
no,
sustained, the answer straight.
When the defendants went into the room, did you find it at all significant that there were only 2 misses?
Well, I would object to the question. If you know testimony, there were misses.
Okay, the question, objection then is objection, assumes facts, not evidence. All right, rephrase the question, objection
Dr.
sustained.
Dr. Burgess, in your evaluation of the crime scene where you gave testimony in front of both juries, didn't you testify that there were 2 misses in the French doors?
I believe I said there were missed shots into the door. I didn't know whether those, I don't think I said as to how many shots had been expounded because pellets can clearly be expended from the bird shots. There's 27 in one and more than that in the bird. So my understanding from the firearm specialist is you cannot determine how many shots were fired.
In your evaluation and in your conclusion that this was a disorganized crime scene, didn't you testify that there were 2 misses?
Overall,
You did so testify.
all right, that's in the form of a question, what is your answer?
I thought I said that there were 2 areas that had expended shell evidence. I'm not sure I said 2 specific shots. I
And so-
didn't mean to say that. I don't know. I don't think anybody can determine that, of how many shots were fired.
All right, so you didn't testify in your crime scene analysis that this was disorganized, that one of the things you considered were the 2 misses in the French doors. You didn't say that,
I
right?
did testify that this was disorganized. One of the reasons being there were multiple shots fired, a gunshot with a wide range of pellets. There were 2 areas that were outside of the range of the 2 victims.
And those were the 2 shots to the French doors, correct?
Those could be 2 shots to the French doors.
Well, what other
Would-
what other shots could you be referring to then? If it's not the French doors?
Rephrase the question.
What other shots are you referring to if it's not the 2 shots in the French door?
That's
Are there
the
other
same
areas where
question.
there appear to be misses in the room?
I thought one went out into the tree out inside.
The tree was outside the French door.
Right.
Okay. So that would be consistent with a pellet passing through the French door into the tree, correct?
Well, it could be. I don't think it's been determined what it was, but there certainly were pellets out in the tree.
Now, I believe you've indicated that this was a crime of high emotionality, correct?
Yes.
Did you,
Overall.
did you consider it interesting that in light of the defendant's testimony that the room was smoky and they couldn't see and that they were very upset that the parents were hit so many times?
No.
You didn't find that inconsistent with their version that they acted out of fear in a random shooting?
Well, that is consistent with acting out of fear and a random, that there's a wide range of shots that are fired. There's no specific targeting, no clear one shot, the wrong weapon, all of those kinds of factors. I go into my categorizing this as a disorganized crime scene.
Mrs. Menendez was shot in 10 areas on her body. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Mr. Menendez was shot 5 times. Correct?
Yes.
And you didn't consider it noteworthy that their state of mind allowed them to hit their target that many times? Did you consider that noteworthy? That in spite of the fact that they were in this automaton rage, that they hit their target that many times?
The point is that there were multiple shots that were fired at a time indicates high emotionality, low thinking.
Now, at some point after the killing, the effects of this, the hormones and the fear response diminish, correct?
There is a period of time when that occurs.
After Mr. Menendez allegedly closed the door to the den on the night of the 20th, which was the cue that prompted this,
One of the cues.
one of the cues that prompted this, wasn't there sufficient time for them to cool down before they went in to shoot?
Rephrase the question.
Okay, you've indicated that after the shooting, but before they picked up the shotgun shells, they would have transformed out of this mental state that they were in, correct?
No, I don't think I said that. I said that there is there can be a lowering, but that is an important phase of this, is when they do go out into the foyer area and they are feeling exhausted. Certainly, Erik Menendez was feeling exhausted, and then came the next step of what to do, so that is what now becomes the post-crime behavior.
If Erik Menendez had felt exhausted after committing a premeditated crime, would that be inconsistent with him having premeditated? Do people who commit planned crimes get tired by committing their crimes?
Well, people that commit planned crimes that are organized are generally calm, collected, and cool, and so that it is not a lot of emotion that is surfacing. And generally, all of this would not be activated. The fear mechanism would not be activated.
When the defendants went to the police and when Erik Menendez went to the police and told him the story that he and his brother had agreed upon, was he still acting in this automatic state?
Well, the part of the offense behavior was over. By the time the police came, which would have been roughly several hours later, there was still quite a bit of shock and fright present, because that is in his statement.
So the fact that he was able to tell the story to the police that he and his brother had agreed upon,
Yes.
in no way changes your mind that he was still acting in some sort of state of fright?
I think it indicates he was in a state of fright, his statement.
Are you familiar with the testimony from Lyle Menendez that he and his brother returned to the house at sometime that morning, the morning of the 21st, because Lyle wanted to retrieve further evidence from his car.
Oh, okay. You've jumped ahead now to about what, 3 in the morning?
8:30 in the morning.
8:30 in the morning. Yes.
Would that be consistent with someone who has just suffered a terrible fright to have the presence of mind to remove evidence in front of the police?
It certainly speaks to his mind state of fear, yes.
Doesn't it show a great deal of coolness for someone to be able to go into a crime scene, recover evidence, and destroy it with a police officer standing right there?
Well, I think both defendants clearly state in their statement to the police that they were at the crime scene.
Don't you think returning to the car to remove evidence with a police officer standing by shows a great deal of coolness on the part of the person doing it?
No, I don't think I would ever make that jump and that leap, no.
But you would make the leap that this crime was committed out of fear, correct?
It's argumentative.
I'm going to give a hypothetical to you, Dr. Burgess. Two brothers have been psychologically manipulated and perhaps abused by their father for a number of years. In May of 1989, one of the brothers is threatened with being disowned by that father. In the summer of 1989, the other brother returns to the family home, having suffered a disastrous semester at a university which had previously expelled him for a year. When that son comes home, his parents are informed on 2 separate occasions that he's on disciplinary and academic probation. 2 days before the parents are killed, one of the brothers has an uneventful tennis lesson at the family home. On that same day, the day of the uneventful tennis lesson, these 2 brothers travel 2 hours from Los Angeles to a gun store in San Diego, and using identification, which is not theirs, forge a signature, create an address, and purchase 2 shotguns. The day before the killings, they go on a trip with their parents, during which nothing eventful happens at all.
Your Honor, at this point, I'm going to have to object that this hypothetical is not within the facts of this case.
The nature of your objection is not the proper one, but the court is going to sustain the objection in nature that it's an improper hypothetical, not on the basis of the nature of this objection, but just it's an improper hypothetical.
Dr. Burgess, you're familiar with the fact that the defendants made up you're familiar with their claim that they made up the alibi after the shooting. Is that correct?
I'm familiar with what they stated happened afterwards, yes.
Did you consider that at all remarkable in light of what you say they went through the week before the shooting, that they were able to think up that alibi after this traumatic event of shooting their parents in fear?
Well, it was also a really crappy alibi. It didn't end up working. Like, it very quickly fell apart.
An interpretation that I wouldn't necessarily make,
Well, what
but they
interpretation?
made it up.
What interpretation would you make of the fact that they say they thought of the alibi after the shooting? What interpretation do you give to that?
Well, they had, first of all, the state that they were in. If you want to take it as an alibi, as I think we've already gone over, that's hardly an alibi that's going to work. And it didn't work. I think that's the more important thing, is that it didn't work.
Dr. Burgess, do you know what psychobabble is?
Yeah, it's Dr. Oziel's testimony.
Do you know what psychobabble
No, I
is?
don't.
I have nothing further.
All right,
Ah.
any redirect?
Ah. Oh my God, that's how she ends it. Do you know what psychobabble is? Yes. Okay, fine. I'm done. Drops mic. It's not a mic drop moment. All right. But this is, I mean, look at her face. Look at her face here. She's just like, what was that? Okay, so that is the end of the cross-examination. We're going to cut it off there and pick it up with the redirect next week, right? Because we don't have a trial scheduled next week unless something changes. But yeah, so next episode we will be picking it up with the redirect, and then we'll be moving on to the next witness. So I hope you guys enjoyed this, or at the very least found it interesting or informative. This is she's a great witness. I really like Dr. Burgess, although there are some of the things that she has testified that I'm kind of iffy on some of her reasoning. Overall, I really like her as a witness, and I really admire her general body of work that she's done in her entire career. So all right, guys, we're gonna have some more content coming out for the James Crumbly trial recaps. We'll probably be doing some live streams this week as well for that to sort of take a closer look at some aspects of the trial. Also, definitely expect a recap to come out tomorrow for sure. That will be encompassing the first few days of trial, and other than that, I think that's everything that I wanted to say. Thanks so much for joining me. And for, continuing on this very long and winding road that is the Menendez trial. And, to the folks that were new in the chat today, welcome. I appreciate you guys jumping in, even though we're a bit of the ways into the trial. So I can understand that there's quite a bit contextually that might be a little confusing at times, but yeah, I'm very happy to see you guys here. Also, thank you to the mods as well as always. Thanks to the folks that super chatted and sent some member chats and whatnot. Wonderful. So, yeah, I will oh, wait a minute. I've got to do the outro thing. Yeah, I'll see you guys in the next video. See ya.